41. Gryffindor Lion. Sagres was glad to be back at Hogwarts. The school housed the largest magical library in Britain. Even the private collections of proud pure-blood families looked paltry by comparison. Those families might boast status, but nearly all of them still relied on school education to pass on their skills. The four founders had done something remarkable. They had turned magical apprenticeship into an academy system, and it had propelled the wizarding world forward. He annotated and circled some obscure passages in the manuscript, then rose to go to the restricted section for related references. He had only taken a few steps when Peeves's grating, high-pitched voice echoed from around the staircase corner, particularly piercing in the silent corridor. "Who's there?" The poltergeist drew the words out, circling like a vulture sniffing for trouble. "Lord Peeves knows perfectly well someone's skulking about." Sagres sighed and slowly withdrew the foot he had already stepped forward with. Of course, he'd run into them again. Young wizards loved night excursions. He tapped his wand lightly on the marble wall. At once it became a one-way glass. Through the window, he watched Peeves tug at the tassels of the staircase carpet and make faces at an empty corridor. "Let me guess." Peeves floated upside down. "Is it Myrtle, or a ghoul stealing from the kitchens, or perhaps a student out after curfew?" He yanked the carpet over his head like a cloak. Just as Peeves was about to burst into a tattletale song, a hoarse whisper drifted through the air. "The Bloody Baron has his reasons for not wishing to be seen." Peeves froze mid-hoot as if his neck had been clipped. He performed a comic somersault, his bell-studded hat nearly flying off. "Respected, sir," he bubbled, suddenly so obsequious it could have been syrup, and made an exaggerated curtsy. "Your loyal servant Peeves apologizes most sincerely." He pretended to slap himself twice. "It's all my useless fish-eye's fault." "Scram." The voice was concise. Peeves shot up the stairs like a popped balloon, knocking over a portrait on the way. The sitter mumbled in his sleep, watching only a rainbow after-image whirl around the corner. Sagres narrowed his eyes. He couldn't see who had spoken, but he knew. Harry Potter under the invisibility cloak, likely with his two inseparable companions. He smiled faintly and flicked his wand to remove the amorphous charm from the stone wall. This was the staircase that led to the forbidden fourth-floor corridor Dumbledore had warned everyone about at the welcoming feast. From hushed professorly conversations, Sagres had also learned that the Philosopher's Stone was behind those closed doors, guarded by a series of protections designed by several staff members. Harry's purpose in being there was clear. Sagres didn't try to catch the would-be rule-breakers. He'd been a student once. Young heads are full of strange, brave ideas. Instead, he cast a disillusionment charm on Loctus, the raven perched on his shoulder, and sent the bird quietly to follow them. Loctus found the door to the fourth-floor corridor slightly ajar. Through the raven's eyes, Sagres watched the gap open a little, then close again as the bird slipped in before it shut. Inside, a massive three-headed dog sprawled on the floor, fluffy, as Hagrid had described, snoring with a harp at its feet. Someone had been there already. Sagres' interest sharpened. He had intended only to observe, but this was more than a mere curfew breaking. He set the manuscript aside on the table in the restricted section and concentrated on the live feed. The dog's nose twitched as if it were waking. The invisibility cloak was pulled back, and three figures appeared. Harry, with a flute in hand, Ron, and Hermione. Harry played. The dog's heads tilted, and it sank into a deeper sleep. Ron slipped open a trapdoor, and the three peered down into the blackness below. "Too reckless," Sagres muttered. Harry handed his flute to Hermione and dove into the hole. Sagres almost smiled despite himself. He admired that sort of courage. But the leap was dangerous. Ordinary students would do well to consider broken bones, spikes, or worse. When Ron and Hermione followed, Sagres sent Loctus down after them. The shaft was completely dark, even to the raven's sharp eyes. Vines snaked everywhere. Devil's Snare had toppled down into the passage. The tendrils coiled around feet and wrists like living ropes. Hermione, the last to descend, managed to wrench free before the vines tightened fully. The two boys were not so lucky. The more they thrashed, the tighter the strangling plants constricted. Sagres felt an inward twinge of amusement. Recklessness met its predictable consequence. "Don't move," Hermione's voice rang through the damp cellar. "It's Devil's Snare." The more you struggle, the tighter it gets. Ron's face had turned purplish. A thick vine looped around his neck like a python. Great, he hissed through clenched teeth. Knowing it's called Devil's Snare is really helpful, otherwise I wouldn't even know what killed me. Help, Hermione, think of something, Harry grunted, prying vines off his chest. I am thinking. Hermione bit her lip, curls plastered to her forehead with sweat. Hurry, or we'll be hauling out 2 corpses. Her mind snapped to a memory. Sprout had said the plant preferred darkness and damp. Harry, straining against the vines, gasped, then set it on fire. Hermione patted frantically at her empty pockets. I don't have anything to make a fire with. Sagres's hand went to his forehead as if someone had hit him with a stupefy. Merlin's beard, he muttered at the sight. Ron, now dangling upside down, roared, You're a witch! Do something with your wand! The remark hit Hermione like a bolt. She pulled out her wand and reflexively reached for the crystal vial that hung on a cord around her neck. A little gift from Harry, pre-prepared for emergencies. She had once captured and studied a similar miniature light during a time in Sagres's class. Flipping the stopper, she released a tiny carved figure that surged out, controlled by her will. Lumos, she cried. A pure white light burst from the little figure, like a miniature sun flaring in the cellar. Warmth washed over the trapped boys. The vines recoiled, hissing away from the brightness. Within seconds, the devil's snare had withdrawn, loosening its grip and flicking its tendrils back into the dark corners. Sagres watched, satisfied. The young wizards were not done for the night yet. Curiosity, courage, and a good pair of friends could carry a surprising number of people through danger. He returned his attention to the parchment on the library table, but kept one eye on Loctus's feed. There were more protections to be seen, and he planned to see them all. 42. Keep moving forward. Cough! Cough! Ron stumbled to the ground, gasping, his fingers clawing at empty air as if the vines were still there. Harry staggered and fell too, his glasses crooked, then immediately looked at Hermione. Well done, he said. Hermione's hand trembled slightly. The spell in the crystal vial had vanished. The vines were retreating into the cracks of the stone wall at unbelievable speed, leaving charred marks on the floor. Sagres frowned in the shadows and muttered, Lucky guess. Lucky? You listened carefully in class, Hermione. That was brilliant. Harry gave her a thumbs up and kept wiping sweat from his face. That wasn't my spell. My spells don't do anything like that. Hermione flushed with embarrassment. I know, Ron said. That's from Professor Greengrass's lesson, right? Yes, Hermione nodded. It's hard to stay calm in a crisis. Sorry, I just... Hermione, Harry cut in. You saved us. Ron nodded too. You did really well, Hermione. But that spell in your vial is used up, isn't it? That's right. We'll have to keep moving. Hermione straightened. They pushed through a dark tunnel and came into a vast circular chamber suddenly lit by a bright, strange light. From the vaulted ceiling, dozens of small metallic objects glittered and flew in circles like a shower of jewels. Wait, Harry squinted and stared. They're not birds, they're keys, winged keys. He pointed at a bronze key, the cold light glinting off its teeth. Hermione scanned the room. It's a puzzle. Ah! She indicated a pile of broomsticks in the corner. We need to catch the right key. Ron was already at the carved wooden door, peering at the keyhole. We're looking for an old, large key, probably silver, maybe like this, he said, shaping the idea with his hands. They each grabbed a broom and flew up. The keys scattered like a startled swarm. Harry's seeker instincts took over. He weaved through the metallic storm and locked onto a target, a large silver key with one wing drooping, flying slower than the rest. I see it! Harry dove. Ron and Hermione flanked him to clear a path. The key sensed danger, wheeled sharply, and shot upward. Harry pulled up hard, flipping his broom inches from the ceiling, and snatched the struggling key with one precise hand. Nice! Ron shouted. The key flapped angrily in Harry's grip until Harry fitted into the lock and turned it with a crisp click. Sagres smiled faintly in the shadows. He noticed the crease on the key's wing was fresh. Someone had gone through here not long before. Dumbledore had set up clever protections, but Sagres had his own plans. Letting Quirrell get the stone might let him follow the trail to where Lord Voldemort hid. Lure the snake out of its hole, an apt phrase. That was why he hadn't interfered. There was no need for extra excuses to be here. and if the trio ran into real danger, he could step in. Let's go. Harry pushed the door open, and the three youngsters slipped into the next room. Sagres sent a raven after them with a flick of his hand, amusement flickering in his eyes. They stepped into a massive chessboard. Black and white squares stretched to the far wall, and 32 towering chess pieces stood arranged, each larger than a person. The white pieces on the opposite side were poised, their stone faces hard and murderous. Ron, the obvious chess player of the three, moved forward to take command. "Looks like we'll have to play ourselves," Hermione said, voice a little shaky. They took their places on the black pieces. Harry stood where a bishop would be, Hermione planted herself on a rook, and Ron took up the knight. He hesitated for a beat, fingertips trembling, but when he touched the carved stone, something steadied him. "Listen," he said, voice curiously calm. "Harry, move 4 squares to the front right." The carved figures began to scrape and grind across the floor. When a white queen struck down a black knight, the whole room shook, and the stone knight's armor split with a thunderous crack. Hermione gasped. Harry felt a cold stab of fear. It's all right," Ron said, throat working. "This is a necessary sacrifice. Harry, now you can take the opponent's bishop." As the game went on, more black pieces amassed by the wall. Sweat purled on Ron's forehead, but his commands grew surer. Twice he anticipated a white 3-move combination and pulled Harry and Hermione out of harm's way in time. Sagres watched from a pillar, a spark of admiration in his eyes. The composure and calculation this red-haired boy showed now were impressive. He wasn't just playing the board, he was managing the whole thing. This Weasley was more interesting than he'd seemed. "Listen." Ron broke the room's tense silence. His voice was steady, almost gentle. "Next, I have to be taken." "No," Harry and Hermione shouted together. Ron wheeled on them, eyes blazing with resolve. "This is chess. Some pieces have to be sacrificed." He pointed at the board. "If I make this move, the queen will take me, but you can checkmate the White King, Harry." "Don't. What are you waiting for? Do you still want to stop Snape or not?" Ron's voice rose, echoing off the stone. Sagres, watching the scene, frowned in confusion at the mention of Snape. It made little sense to him, but Ron stepped forward like a proper knight, lifted his chin and said, "Do as I say." When Ron moved, the White Queen obeyed fate. Her stone scepter came down in a wind-whistling arc. In the instant before she struck, Ron gave Harry a trembling, brave smile and mouthed, "Checkmate him." Then Ron collapsed, knocked out by the blow. Harry's heart seemed to tear in two, but he didn't betray Ron's plan. 3 moves later, the White King's crown clattered off the board, and the white pieces lowered their weapons. They had won. The next door opened slowly. Harry and Hermione, sorrowful, looked back at Ron one last time, then hurried on down the passage. "Ron, he'll be fine," Harry said with forced certainty, as if reassuring himself. And he was right. Sagres had arrived in time, and with a single invigoration spell, healed Ron's wounds and revived him. Sagres gently stroked Ron's chin as the boy stirred. The game had been more than a test of chess. It had been a trial of courage. They had passed. Sagres had to admit they had done very well. 43. Forward and backward, Harry and Hermione's adventure continued. When they pushed open the heavy wooden door, a wave of stench, rot, and mildew mixed together slammed into them. They staggered back, coughing, tears streaming uncontrollably from their eyes. Through blurred vision, they saw a colossal creature pacing the room, dragging a stone club. Easily 15 feet tall, each of its heavy steps made the floor tremble. "Merlin's beard," Hermione's voice caught. This troll was larger than the one on Halloween. Grayish-green skin covered in boils, a strip of animal hide around its waist giving off a nauseating smell. It stopped, tilted its head, and watched them with dull, murky eyes that showed a flicker of curiosity. "Don't just stand there, Hermione." Harry grabbed her wrist. "Remember Professor Greengrass's practical class? Fred said they taught us." "What?" Hermione blinked, bewildered. "Professor Greengrass's practicals? Didn't lots of students learn how to deal with trolls?" "Those spells. You must know at least one," Harry shouted, already running to draw the troll's attention. Hermione snapped back to herself. "Spells. Yes, I know quite a few," she muttered to herself, forcing her fear down, thinking. "Right, think. I've got it." "Lead it here," she called, pointing to a marked spot just ahead. "Draw it over." The troll lunged at Harry several times but missed. Growing impatient, it began swinging its club. Harry darted and dodged, twisting and leaping out of the way, sweat beaded on his forehead. At last, he steered it into the spot Hermione had indicated. She raised her wand. "Floor collapse," she cried. Where Harry had just been standing, the floor suddenly gave way. The troll, chasing him, didn't notice until it was too late and fell into the pit. It crashed down with a thunderous roar, dislodging its club. The stone projectile flew toward Harry as he looked back. "Wingardium Leviosa!" Harry shouted, and the levitation charm seized the club mid-flight, halting it inches from his face. "Boulder impact," Hermione commanded, directing the club against the troll's skull. The beast, which had thrashed a moment earlier, went limp, knocked unconscious by the blow. A dark, bloody lump had already formed on its head. Harry collapsed onto the stone floor, his heart pounding as though it might burst. Hermione kept her wand trained on the troll, her arm trembling, but her expression hardening with resolve. "Come on, Professor Snape might already have the Philosopher's Stone," she urged, pulling Harry to his feet. They stumbled into the next chamber and gulped the fresher air greedily, only to freeze. On an ancient stone table, 7 glass bottles of different shapes were arranged in a neat row, catching an eerie blue fire and throwing back ghostly reflections. Harry felt the scar on his forehead prickle. Behind them, a door flared with strange purple fire. Ahead, the exit was guarded by a wall of black, inky flame. They were trapped. Hermione stepped forward with shaking fingers and unrolled a parchment. When Harry leaned in, he caught a scent of wormwood and mint on the paper. Hermione read the riddle softly, her voice barely carrying in the small chamber. As she worked through each clue, Harry's eyes flicked between the bottles. An emerald liquid swirled in a slender crystal bottle on the far left. In a squat ceramic jar, a dark purple potion slithered like something alive. Frost glazed the surface of a silver bottle in the center. "This is clever," Hermione said finally. "But it's not just magic, it's pure logical deduction. Without reasoning, you'd be stuck here forever. One of them lets us pass the black flames, and another sends us back through the purple," Harry said, tense. Hermione's lips moved over the text. "The 4th clue tells us the second from the left and the second from the right taste the same. They're both nettle wine and won't help. Elimination leaves the smallest bottle as the one that will get us through the black fire, and this round bottle will send you back through the purple." As she spoke, a bubble popped in the conical flask on the far right, and the amber liquid inside visibly diminished. "Hermione," Harry said, voice tight, "those potions are evaporating." "I've solved it," Hermione snapped, laying down the parchment. She touched each bottle with her wand to double-check. She seemed suddenly very young and very fierce all at once. Harry took a steadying breath. "Listen," he said, surprising himself with the steadiness in his voice. "You go back and find Ron. Get 2 brooms from the Flying Keys room. Go to the Owlery and have Hedwig send a letter to Professor Dumbledore." His green eyes flashed as they reflected the sway of the black flames. "If you can, find Professor Greengrass." Hermione's fingers closed around the round bottle, knuckles whitening. "But what if Greengrass is with Professor Snape?" "I got away from him once," Harry said, touching the lightning-shaped scar on his forehead. He forced a smile. "Maybe I can do it again." Hermione's face crumpled, and then she stepped forward and hugged him fiercely. "You're the bravest wizard I know," she murmured into his shoulder. Harry blushed and pulled back. "You're the amazing one," he said, awkwardly, and then added, quieter, "Without you, we wouldn't have passed the first test." Hermione wiped her wet eyes. "Me? I can memorize things. Some things, courage, friendship, you can't learn from a book." "Exactly. Precious things," Harry answered. He picked up the smallest bottle, the one that would take him forward, and handed the round one to Hermione. "Here, take this to go back." Hermione checked the bottles again as if to reassure herself, then drew a breath, lifted the round bottle, and plunged into the purple flames behind them. As she stepped through, Harry heard her voice barely. "Tell Ron, his chess playing's the best." The flames swallowed her, leaving only a wisp of curly hair as she disappeared. Harry stood alone in front of the stone table, the small crystal bottle warm in his palm. The black flames in front of him churned like some monstrous maw. He raised the bottle, looked once at the parchment and at the tunnel that lay beyond the fire, and whispered to the silent room, "I have to do this." Hermione, having stepped through the purple flames, was about to go to Ron's dormitory when she noticed that the foul stench in the corridor had vanished. She lowered the sleeve she'd been using to cover her nose and mouth, and only then realized there was someone else in the corridor. "Professor Greengrass?" she said in surprise. "How did you get here?" "That's my question for you, Miss Granger," Sagres replied with a thin smile. "We shouldn't have acted without permission. I'll tell you everything that happened, but the situation is urgent. Harry is in danger. We must go at once." "Calm down, Miss Granger." He cut her off, measured and unhurried. "The fact that I'm standing here means the situation is still under my control." Hermione remembered Sagres's earlier display of power and, reassured, forced herself to calm. Sagres nodded and pointed to Ron, still sprawled on the floor. "Waked him. Weasley will be furious if he misses the most exciting part of the truth." Without waiting for Ron to get his bearings, Sagres cast a charm on the three of them, an invulnerability to fire and water ward, then led the two students through the flame door. Meanwhile, the moment the potion slid down Harry's throat, he felt a climbing lightness inside him. He walked to the black wall of fire, and to his astonishment, the flames parted obediently like curtains. The chamber beyond opened into a circular stone room, and in its center stood the mirror of Erised, its surface gleaming with a cold silver light. The figure before the mirror was not Snape, as Harry had feared, nor was it Lord Voldemort. It was Professor Quirrell. The Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, who had always seemed nervous and twitchy, now stood with his back straight and an unnervingly poised composure. When Quirrell turned, Harry took a step back. The twitching face was gone. It was calm now, a small, composed smile on his lips. "Potter," Quirrell said, his voice low and hoarse like a snake sliding across stone, "I wondered if you would come." You're not," Harry started. "Not a stuttering fool," Quirrell chuckled, a brittle sound that made Harry's skin crawl. "How could this be? Why isn't it Snape?" Harry's scar throbbed suddenly, hot and sharp. "Snape. It's thanks to Snape that you're still intact. If he hadn't been muttering counter curses, you'd have been smashed to pieces at Quidditch long ago. And that damned Greengrass," his voice snapped with hatred, "he ruined my carefully arranged plan." Harry reeled. Snape protecting him? The potions master who had always seemed to hate him? That was harder to accept than anything else in the room. "It doesn't matter," Quirrell sneered and snapped his fingers. Ropes, like living snakes, burst from the floor and coiled around Harry, binding him. "Tonight the Dark Lord will have what he desires." "You cannot live in this world any longer, Potter," Quirrell hissed. "I meant to finish this in the Forbidden Forest, but that meddling woman almost killed me. If I had been slower, this is your fault, but no matter. No one can save you now, Harry Potter. This time, no one will save you." "But first," he added, "you must wait. I want to study this interesting mirror properly." "That figure in the Forbidden Forest was you?" Harry's eyes widened. "You were drinking unicorn blood?" "Yes." Quirrell stared into the mirror without turning his head. "For decades, I never knew the magic contained in such things. It should have made me stronger. It's a pity that Greengrass has been wandering the forest lately. Otherwise, my magic would be greater now." "But won't it curse you?" Harry forced himself to ask. "Drinking unicorn blood, don't you die by that?" Quirrell glanced at him, unconcerned. "Curse?" Quirrell said. "What are you talking about, Potter? Do you want to stop me from examining this mirror with your child's tales?" He prowled around the mirror, wand twirling between his fingers. "I see the Philosopher's Stone. I see myself presenting it to my master, a handsome reward in return. Does this mirror show what is to come? That's the mirror of Erised," Harry blurted, seizing for time and hoping to catch Quirrell's attention. It worked. Quirrell turned, expression blank. "You know about this mirror?" he asked. "Tell me, Potter. Tell me its secret." Quirrell's voice was flat. Harry swallowed, terrified. "If I tell you, will you let me go? Professor Quirrell, I don't want to die." "Oh, Potter," Quirrell chuckled softly. "Begging for mercy, are we? The famous savior." "I don't want to be a savior," Harry snapped. "I just want to be an ordinary person." I understand, Potter." Quirrell's smile was all artifice as he moved closer. "My master will be merciful to you, But first you must tell me everything you know." Harry began to weave a careful lie. "This is the Mirror of Erised," he said slowly. "It shows people what they most desire, but it doesn't show the truth." "You mean the Philosopher's Stone isn't here?" Quirrell's face darkened. "Of course not," Harry continued, finding words quicker now. "Professor Dumbledore carries the stone himself. I've seen it, in a small cloth bag." He kept lying. Dumbledore's protection, his tricks. Perhaps this was placed as a trap. Professor Greengrass, he improvised, ordered it to mislead those who would seek the stone. Quirrell's eyes widened. "What did you say?" he demanded, looking around. "Master, we have been deceived. This is a trap." A deep, hoarse voice cut through Quirrell's exclamation like ice. The sound came from inside Quirrell, and it chilled Harry to the bone. "That boy is lying to you, fool!" Harry felt as though he had dropped through the floor. The voice continued, coarse and whispering. "The Philosopher's Stone is in the mirror. If you cannot take it yourself, use that boy. He can help you get it." Quirrell turned back to Harry, his face a mask of sudden dread. "All right, Potter." He forced his anger down and waved his hand. The ropes slackened and fell away. "You should not have lied to me, but I will not blame you. Now come here." "Look into the mirror and tell me what you see," Quirrell commanded. Harry didn't know how he walked to the mirror. The voice he'd heard kept echoing in his mind, and for a moment he thought he had imagined it. He told himself to keep lying. Whatever he saw, he must lie. He stood before the glass and looked up. He had expected to see his family. Instead, the reflection that faced him was pale. The scar on his forehead looked darker in the mirror's light. The figure in the mirror smiled, a smile Harry did not recognize. The reflected Harry reached into his robe and pulled out a blood-red gem. The Philosopher's Stone gleamed in the mirror like a drop of congealed blood. The reflected Harry winked, tucked the gem away. Thump! Harry's robe pocket suddenly felt heavy, and warmth pressed through the fabric. The stone had appeared in his pocket out of nowhere. He forced himself to show no shock. Quirrell was right behind him, smelling of sweat and fear. Quirrell glanced suspiciously at the mirror. "What did you see?" he demanded. Harry kept his face carefully frightened. The reflection in the mirror had returned to the frightened, false Harry. But through the fabric he felt the stone's faint, steady warmth, like a tiny beating heart. "I saw crowds around me," he said quickly. "I became a Gryffindor prefect. I became head boy." Quirrell impatiently shoved past him and leaned to look into the glass. "Lies," he spat. "That boy is lying." The same hoarse voice spoke again, but Harry saw that Quirrell's mouth did not move. Quirrell snapped back to Harry. "Potter, tell the truth. Do not lie before my master. It's useless." "Quirinus, let me speak to him, face to face," the voice said. "The boy seems a liar. It would be better if I spoke." "But master, your strength is not yet recovered. I still have this much." The voice was clipped, angry. "Do not make me say it twice." "Yes, master, yes." Quirrell bowed his head, trembling. He reached up and unwound his turban, and in the flicker of torchlight, Harry saw the bald scalp beneath. Quirrell turned so that the back of his head faced Harry. For a moment, Harry felt the old nightmare return. He wanted to scream, but no sound came. He wanted to run, but his feet felt rooted. Where the back of Quirrell's head should have been was instead a human face. A face Harry had never seen that was more terrible than any he'd imagined. The skin was the color of bone. The eyes glowed red. Beneath them were two thin snake-like slits for nostrils. "Harry Potter," the face whispered. "We meet again at last." Harry stumbled and slid down the stone steps, dizzy. The face on the back of Quirrell's head spoke on, smooth and cold. "Look what you made me do," it hissed. "I lost my own body and wandered the forest like a ghost, living on snakes and rats." Harry could not reply. His mouth felt dry. The voice continued, and then offered him a bargain. "It does not matter. The great and mighty Lord Voldemort can give you a chance. Give me the Philosopher's Stone in your pocket, and I will spare you." A storm of feeling churned inside Harry. Voldemort knew everything. He could read minds, legilimency, and had learned what Harry had been trying to conceal. For a moment, Harry felt a grip of despair. Then, beyond the terror, a steady thought formed. He had prepared for this possibility before he ever entered the room. "You would have taken my parents' lives and left me for dead 11 years ago," the face said, venom in every word. "You think you can resist me now as your father did?" The face sneered and recounted details Harry had never seen. James pushed and struck back, his wand useless, blasted by green light. Lily choosing to cover her child with her own body. Voldemort's enjoyment of the scene made Harry's stomach drop. The face spoke on with relish of Avada Kedavra and dying to protect a child. Harry could see none of those images now, only the voice, only the mockery. He forced himself up and, with everything he had, shoved his hand into his pocket and flung the stone into the black flames burning in the doorway. "How dare you!" the voice shrieked with sudden fury. Lord Voldemort's face contorted. He thrust out his hand and cast Accio for the stone, but before the gem could fly to him, a raven appeared from nowhere and snatched it from the air. "Mr. Loctus!" Harry's shout cut through the chaos. Quirrell looked terrified. "Master, that's Greengrass's raven. He's here!" A raven settled on the shoulder of a black-robed figure. 2 young wizards followed behind him. Relief flooded Harry. He glanced at Sagres and his companions. Sagres met his gaze and gave a small, steadying smile. Harry almost cried, but held it in. "Sagres," the dark man said, tasting the name with a faint grin. "Lord Voldemort, how have you fallen to this? Stealing from children." Sagres plucked the Philosopher's Stone from the raven's beak and turned it over in his hand, examining it. No wonder Voldemort had tolerated Quirrell's clumsy theater. He had been hiding in plain sight the whole time. Let Quirrell act out. The more obvious the show, the safer the ruse. Who would suspect that the problem professor in defense against the dark arts was the Dark Lord himself? A flash of disappointment crossed Sagres's face. Voldemort's expression flickered too, but he didn't react to the sarcasm. After a beat of silence, he said softly, "Sagres, I know your family. Your father was one of my most loyal followers. We didn't need to become enemies." The 3 young wizards around them froze. Professor Greengrass's father had served Voldemort? The thought was dizzying. Sagres's next words answered their stunned looks. "Yes," Sagres said. "Not only him." His smile was cold. "Many in the Greengrass family once followed you. They're all in Azkaban now." Voldemort's voice cooed with false sympathy. "I understand. It's tragic. Give me the stone. When I regain my strength, I can free them." "Free them?" Sagres's laugh was a short, angry thing. "Why would you free them? Some of them I sent myself." Voldemort and the young wizards blinked. Sagres went on, voice growing colder. "Your pure-blood dogma is rubbish. Magic doesn't survive by clinging to the past. It evolves. Mutation, fusion, innovation. Your view of magic is backward and stifling." "Silence, filthy half-breed," Voldemort snapped, finally losing his temper. His fury made the 3 young wizards step back in unison. "The rule of pure-blood wizards is destiny. How could you, a mongrel, understand the greatness of blood?" Sagres handed the stone without a tremor to Hermione, who stood behind him, then drew his wand with casual ease. "Is that so? If you believe that, explain why you bent your knee in the Forbidden Forest and drank unicorn blood." He descended the steps toward the Dark Lord. Voldemort took a step backward. "Magic doesn't care about your name," Sagres said quietly. "You learned that when you lived off snakes and rats in the shadows." He flicked his wand. Avada Kedavra. Green lightning leapt at him. Sagres made no attempt to dodge. From the tip of his wand, a pale bird of flame burst forth and struck the killing curse head-on. The green light winked out as if it had been swallowed. "Well," Sagres said, nodding once, "at least you still have the nerve to point your wand at me. I can already see traces of the Dark Lord's power, even if it is weak." "Flipendo!" Voldemort spat another spell, black energy lancing forward. Sagres flicked his wand, and the bolt disintegrated. "Still not enough," he said, frowning briefly. "If this is all you have, death will find you today." Voldemort lashed out with a red, seething curse. "Crucio!" The crimson light twisted like a serpent and cut across Sagres, but it did not stop him. He laughed, cold and scornful. "Crucio, I learned that when I was 5. My mother's version was stronger than yours." Cornered, Voldemort threw everything into one desperate blast. A deep red flame erupted, rose into the air, and became a giant fiery serpent. Fiendfire, a living blaze that snarled its way toward Sagres. Hermione gasped nearby. "Fiendfire? Is it very powerful?" one of the young wizards asked. "Yes," Hermione said. "Fiendfire is nearly uncontrollable. It has a will of its own, hellfire that burns everything in its path." The others looked worried. Sagres kept walking without pause. "Fiendfire, the fire of destruction," he said. Coincidentally, I have rather a lot of research on it. He stepped into the roaring inferno as if it were an ordinary fog. The expected catastrophe did not occur. The deep red snake of flame shifted when it touched him, shrinking and becoming a pale, fiery bird. It turned and lunged at Voldemort. Voldemort threw up a complex barrier, a weave of finite incantatum, freezing charms, an aguamenti surge, and advanced amorphous work. The pale firebird slammed into that defense and gradually dissipated. "Impressive," Sagres said, dryly. "Truly worthy of the Dark Lord." His tone, though flat, dripped with derision. Then he raised his wand. Fiery uprising. The pale bird Voldemort had been forced to tame snapped like a leash under Sagres' command. It flared into an even more violent inferno and turned on its master. Voldemort's face changed from confidence to panic as the flames surged. From inside the blaze, a voice screamed, hoofing with terror. "Sagres, please, I was forced." Quirrell shrieked and wailed, begging. "He controlled me. Lord Voldemort controlled me. I wanted to tell, but I had no chance." Sagres' hand gave a lazy little wave, and the flames drew back like a tide. There on the floor lay Quirrell, limp, disheveled, whimpering. "Sagres, help me," Quirrell sobbed. "Give me another chance. I'll go to Azkaban. I don't care. Just spare me. I was helpless." A silent, surgical spell cleaved across the back of Quirrell's head. By the time Quirrell registered it, a clean incision had opened, blood spouting, but the face still clung to the back of his skull. Sagres' brows did not relax. He continued. "Flesh stripping," he intoned. The spell did a thing that chilled everyone. It forced the physical body and the parasite souls apart. Quirrell screamed with new and fierce pain as the false face, Voldemort's haunting visage, was torn away from the back of his head. "You will all die." The mangled, bloody face raged, gnashing at Quirrell as it was peeled free. It seemed to consume flesh and soul in a frenzy. In moments, Quirrell's body had been ravaged, left a hollow, twitching husk, skin and scraps where a person had been. The detached face contracted as if gathering itself, then detonated in a terrible explosion. Dust and broken fragments flew outward in a choking gust. Sagres stepped forward and, cold and precise, intoned a cleansing spell, Scourge, that purified the dust to nothing. Silence fell. The room stood empty, the air settling. Sagres let his wand drop slowly. The three young wizards and Hermione remained protected behind a charm. Quirrell lay on the floor, half dead, battered and depleted of magic, flesh and soul in the aftermath, barely clinging to life. "Lord Voldemort? Is he dead?" Quirrell rasped with the last of his strength. "No," Sagres said, expressionless. "He escaped." Hearing that, the three young wizards felt a strange, familiar chill. The scene was one they had seen before, in memory, in story, like the moment when Vilas expelled Voldemort, when the centaur lion drove him from the Forbidden Forest. The realization slid through them and left them suddenly very small and terribly certain that they had only postponed what was to come. Chapter 46, Rewards and Punishments. "I really regret it. I only wanted to learn some powerful magic from him, and then expose him. I never thought it would end like this." Quirrell's voice trailed into a whisper. He died with his eyes fixed on the ceiling, his life just gone. Harry stared at the still figure until Sagres, without looking back, tapped his wand and caused a little mound of earth to rise up. "Was he a Death Eater?" Harry asked at last. "Not really," Sagres replied as he finished covering the body. "Just an ordinary man whose sight was clouded by greed." The three Gryffindors fell silent. Sagres' words were grimly true. Most Death Eaters came from pure-blood families and followed Voldemort because his ideology protected and extended their privileges. The magical world's riches were fixed. A small group of purebloods monopolized most of it, and they wanted it all back. "But he did try to kill me, didn't he?" Harry said, frowning. "Even if he didn't succeed." "He did," Sagres agreed. "But he was clumsy. He was working under internal pressure." He restored the shattered mirror of Erised with a casual flick. The dust knitted together and the glass reformed. "Not everyone will fight to the end when faced with the Dark Lord," Sagres said. Quirrell gave in. "Maybe he never truly wanted to kill you." "I don't follow," Hermione said. "If he wanted to kill you, why try it in the middle of a Quidditch match? Why not do it privately?" Sagres waved his wand at a stone in the cellar. It crumbled to powder. For a strong wizard, killing a newcomer is easy, one flick of the wand, but to act where everyone can see is different. Under the eyes of teachers and students, even if you fell from your broom, there'd be no way to make it look like anything but an accident. But Quirrell said not everyone is as powerful as you, Hermione said, still unconvinced. Thank you for the compliment. Sagres smiled. But don't underestimate your defense against the dark arts, Professor. Someone who can break into Gringotts and leave unharmed is not ordinary. He looked at the small mound of dirt again and sighed. Still, in the end, he was abandoned by Lord Voldemort. He lowered his voice. Voldemort is not only ruthless to his enemies, he is equally cold to his followers. They walked back slowly to the surface. Sagres even stopped to repair a few damaged items as they went. "Where's Dumbledore?" Harry asked. "Doesn't he know what happened?" "He received an urgent summons from the Ministry and went to London," Sagres answered plainly. "Professor, can I ask you some questions?" Harry ventured. "Of course, answering questions is a professor's duty. Why did Voldemort want to kill me? How did I survive? Why did he say I was the cause of his condition?" Sagres shook his head. "I was only 10 back then, Potter. I don't know much. Dumbledore might know more. He seems to know most things. What about the invisibility cloak? Did Voldemort, you know who, give it to me?" "I don't know for certain," Sagres admitted. "I once saw an identical cloak in Dumbledore's office. It's possible, though I can't say for sure." "Do you think Dumbledore meant for all this to happen?" Ron asked, incredulous. "If he did," Hermione began, then cut herself off. "That would be terrifying." "I trust Dumbledore," Harry murmured. "If he wanted to harm us, it would be easy for him to do so openly." Sagres considered them thoughtfully. "Dumbledore is a complicated man. He's a good man, wise and compassionate, and he has protected the magical world time and again, but he is not a saint. He has his flaws, ambition in his youth, an idealism that can be arrogant, and sometimes a tendency to focus on the big picture at the expense of individuals. He can be very tolerant toward the weak and extremely watchful of the strong. Still, I respect him enormously," Hermione sighed. "No wonder the obstacles felt like tests. It's a shame Voldemort escaped." "You can call him by his name," Sagres said. "Fear of a name only increases fear of the thing itself. With his present strength, however, name magic is a fantasy. Call him Lord Voldemort." He fell silent for a moment, then cleared his throat. "About punishment for rule-breaking." "We stopped Quirrell and prevented Lord Voldemort getting the stone," Ron protested. "Are you really going to take points off us for that?" "Technically," Sagres said, "you aided in getting the Philosopher's Stone from the mirror and created a situation in which it was nearly stolen." He raised a hand before they could interrupt and explained. "The final enchantment on the mirror was set by Dumbledore. It combined the mirror's usual properties with precautions that let only someone who wanted to find the stone, but who would not use it, retrieve it. Alone, Quirrell couldn't have gotten it, and neither could Voldemort." His tone softened. "You all did very well in places. Mr. Weasley, your performance on the chessboard was excellent. Your courage in the final moves was admirable." Ron's face flushed with pride. "But you broke school rules, so I must deduct 1 point," Sagres added. "Believe me, I'm being lenient compared to some of the other professors." "1 point?" Ron blinked, then brightened. "Thank you, Professor. That's brilliant. Miss Granger," he continued, "your reasoning and your readiness with advanced spells were commendable. You showed good timing against the troll, for example." Hermione looked embarrassed. "Thank you. However, for breaking the rules, I must deduct 2 points from you," Sagres said, "and I will authorize your attendance in my practical defense against the dark arts class next term. Up until now, you were only auditing theory." Hermione's eyes lit up. "Really? I'd be honored." Sagres turned to Harry. "Potter, I'm here," Harry said. "I was impressed by your quick thinking. The lies you told when you faced Quirrell bought time. That kind of composure under pressure is rare. You'll learn about legilimency later. It explains why Quirrell couldn't be fooled ultimately. For your quick mind and courage, I will award Gryffindor 3 points." "So that means," Ron began. "No additions, no deductions," Hermione interjected, smiling in relief. "Very well," Sagres said mildly. "House points and official results will be recorded in a few days. For now, get some sleep." He levitated them up from the underground chamber to the corridor, gently soothing Fluffy as they passed. He saw them as far as the entrance to the Gryffindor common room. "Results will be out in a few days." Have a good holiday. Professor, Hermione called as he turned to leave, and she reached into her pocket and pulled out the small red stone. I forgot this, the Philosopher's Stone. Sagres considered it a second. Keep it with you, Miss Granger. But, Hermione began, astonished. Dumbledore returns tomorrow. You can tell him then, Sagres said with a sly wink. And don't you want things to ask him? This will be a good excuse. But it's the Philosopher's Stone, Hermione insisted. I know what it is, Sagres said with a faint smile. It turns metal into gold. It grants extended life. People imagine it as the answer to every desire. But think about it. Endless wealth and endless life only multiply human greed. Possessing one mountain of gold makes you want another. Living 1,000 years makes you want still more. It tears apart the natural cycle of life and death and magnifies desire until it's destructive. In truth, it is not as wonderful as it seems. With that, he left, and the three watched him go, thoughtful. I always feel like Professor Sagres is trying to make trouble for Dumbledore, Ron said at last. I think so too, Harry said. Sagres returned to the Hogwarts library to continue his research on the manuscript. This time, no one interrupted him. He lost himself in the restricted section until the afternoon of the next day. Only when fatigue finally crept in did he pull out his wand and cast 2 consecutive spells on himself, Waking Requiem and Sleep Evaporation. Over the years, those 2 charms had bought him countless hours. They were his secret weapons for studying day and night. Waking Requiem was like a brief spiritual rest. It could substitute for actual sleep, letting the caster's body and mind enter a rest state without closing their eyes or ceasing activity. Sleep Evaporation suppressed the body's need for sleep and smoothed recovery, letting a person stay awake and effective for longer. Sagres had found both in the Greengrass family library. They had originally been intended to create a tireless army of servants. With the Greengrasses, Decline the Spells had been forgotten. He had once tried them on a whim and discovered how useful they were, so long as they weren't overused. Excess could drive someone to mania or emotional collapse, but if one permitted oneself a real sleep roughly every 10 days, the side effects were small. Since he had built the mechanical mind, those side effects had become even less of a problem. Leaving the library, he planned to go to the Great Hall for something to eat, but Fawkes, Professor Dumbledore's phoenix, found him first. The bird held a scrap of paper between its beak. Please come to the headmaster's office. Password, Toffee. Sagres stopped for a couple of pies from a house elf and walked up to the 8th floor, eating as he went. The stone gargoyle rotated aside, and his black robes brushed past the candlelight on the spiral staircase. Professor Dumbledore sat by the phoenix perch, fingers stroking the shimmering crimson patterns of the Philosopher's Stone. Good afternoon, Sagres, the headmaster said, his half-moon spectacles gleaming. Do you think I should add a few more medals of contribution to Hogwarts? Sagres took a cup from the tea tray, tapped the rim, and swapped the mead for coffee with a small twist of his wand. For Potter and the other 2? He asked between sips. It seems you don't blame them for acting on their own. Though I am an old man, I was once young, Dumbledore replied with a smile. They were reckless, yes, but they are not wicked. Their potential is remarkable. You're the headmaster. Your call, Sagres said indifferently. Is that why you summoned me? The Philosopher's Stone in Dumbledore's hand lifted and glowed, turning the office warm with light. Of course not. There is something else. Dumbledore watched the little orb and sighed. A miracle of 600 years, life will eventually return to dust. After long discussion, Nicholas Flamel and I believe the best course is to destroy the stone. Sagres' expression hardened. Destroy it? Nicholas agreed to that? He did, Dumbledore said. Then won't he and his wife die? Everyone dies, Sagres, Dumbledore answered gently. For someone of your age, death is a strange, frightening thing. Nicholas and Perenelle have seen it differently. To them, death is a peaceful sleep after a long journey, perhaps even the beginning of a new, magnificent adventure. Sagres stayed quiet. He had expected no less, yet something else lay behind Dumbledore's words. The headmaster's eyes twinkled. But it is not quite what you imagine, is it? You thought no one could resist the temptation of immortality once they had tasted it. Sagres began to protest, but Dumbledore's tone turned grave. You are very clever, Sagres. Among the young people I have met, There are few as intelligent, but you are also proud. You look down on others. Even if you hide it, I can see it." The words hit harder than legilimency had ever done. Sagres was silent, suddenly aware of a truth he had not wanted to see. He had been smug, an exiled transmigrator who regarded everyone else as natives beneath him, secure in the knowledge of secret advantages. He had convinced himself he was humble, eager to learn. The fact was different. Dumbledore's voice softened. "Perhaps you have seen wonders no one else has. Perhaps you know magics no one else does. That is no license for arrogance. If you keep looking down on people, you will stumble because of it. You thought no one could resist the stone, but Nicholas and his wife have prepared themselves. In many ways, they have been braver than you." Sagres swallowed and then nodded slowly. "I understand. Thank you, Professor Dumbledore." Dumbledore laughed, pleased at the frank reply. Then he frowned and added, "But between you and me, I do not think destroying the stone is necessarily the right choice." "You're considering keeping it?" Sagres asked. "If we destroy it, we lose the single greatest triumph of alchemy. It could guide future generations. Yet every fragment might breed another Tom Riddle." Dumbledore's voice was rueful. "And you know how corrupting the elixir of life can be. Put it somewhere safer than Gringotts," Sagres suggested. "Place it with a mind that even the best legilimens cannot find." "You mean, carry it with you?" Dumbledore looked surprised. "Just keep it on you," Sagres said calmly. "It's small. Put it in your pocket. No one will covet it if you are its guardian." Dumbledore set the scarlet stone gently on the desk and considered. "It would be a weight," he said. "I am old. How many years could I realistically guard it?" "That was only a suggestion," Sagres said, meeting the question with composure. "I won't force you. I only think it would be a loss to destroy it entirely." Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. It was a line of thought he had not fully considered. "Nicholas and I will think seriously about it." Sagres rose to leave, then paused. "By the way, who was the Tom Riddle you mentioned?" Dumbledore's smile turned inscrutable. "You met him last night," he said at last. "Lord Voldemort." A surge of curiosity pushed Sagres back into the chair. "You know about him?" "I have tried to understand him," Dumbledore said slowly. "I don't know why he is still existing. Perhaps he is no longer truly alive." He touched his spectacles and looked as if he were seeing events across time. "Tom Riddle sought immortality with a consuming hunger. He paid an enormous price and went further down that path than anyone I have met." Sagres thought of what he had seen and of true immortality. In the histories he knew, nothing like absolute immortality appeared. Nicholas Flamel's 6 centuries were long but not endless. The elixir of life delayed death but did not halt aging. Flamel himself was still an old man. "I have another request," Sagres said after a pause, a trace of solemnity in his voice. "A small bottle of the elixir of life. Just a sample." "You don't intend to drink it?" Dumbledore asked, his gaze sharpened. "No," Sagres said. "I wouldn't. I need it to trade for something." Dumbledore leaned forward. "Tell me." "A time-turner," Sagres admitted. "An unregistered one because it's broken." The headmaster frowned for the briefest instant, then nodded. "I will ask Nicholas Flamel for you. I doubt he would refuse after what you did to protect the stone." Bart Dumbledore's face grew serious. "But I must warn you, time magic is dangerous. I don't want Hogwarts to lose a valued professor because of meddling with time. Abusing a time-turner can make a person obsessed with correcting mistakes and blind them to the need to accept reality." Sagres smiled and inclined his head. "I understand. I have no intention of changing events. I only want to keep an option open." Dumbledore studied him a moment longer, then, perhaps satisfied, allowed a small smile. Outside, the phoenix on its perch glowed softly, and the crimson light from the stone painted the room warm and complicated as ever. Chapter 48, College Cup. When Sagres stepped into the Great Hall, it was already packed. The house banners had been replaced with Slytherin's green and silver in celebration of their 7th consecutive House Cup win, and a giant serpent hung over the wall behind the staff table. Sagres curled his lip. Snape had been instrumental, no doubt. If the potions master hadn't been so eager to dock points from the other houses, the outcome might still have been in question. Sagres, for his part, had never cared much for the cup. To him, it was a symbolic honor at best. Yes, it helped students identify with their houses, but it also sharpened inner-house antagonism and prejudice. The hall buzzed like a cage of restless birds, students eager for the holidays. At the staff table, the professors chatted quietly. One thing always puzzled Sagres: the teachers rarely failed students in finals. The leniency reminded him of the happy education he'd read about in the West, but that didn't change his own standards. He would still give zeros where they were earned. When Dumbledore's silver hair appeared at the entrance, the noise fell away like a tide. "Another year. How time flies," the headmaster said in that honeyed voice with an undeniable authority. "Before we enjoy this magnificent feast, allow this old man a few words." He winked, earning soft laughs from the younger students. "This year, each of you has grown, some of you more than others." Good-natured laughter rippled through the hall. Professor McGonagall at the staff table pinched her lips. "Now, the winner of this year's House Cup." Dumbledore waved his wand. The 4 house hourglasses shimmered and floated up. 4th place, Gryffindor. 3rd, Hufflepuff. 2nd, Ravenclaw. 1st. He drew the last word out deliberately. Slytherin's long table shifted impatiently. "Slytherin!" A silver-green roar broke out. Draco Malfoy slammed his goblet down, the crystal clinking against oak, his pale face flushed with triumph as he shot a provocative look toward Gryffindor. Crabbe and Goyle waved their massive arms, narrowly missing their pumpkin juice. Pansy Parkinson squealed and tossed silver-green streamers into the air. "So far, that is. Slytherin has the most points." Dumbledore's beard trembled in the candlelight. He raised a hand to quiet the cheering Slytherins. His blue eyes twinkled behind his half-moon spectacles. "However," his voice took on a playful tone, "everything that happened before the end of term should be taken into consideration." His gaze swept the staff table. McGonagall straightened. Snape's mouth twitched. Sagres lifted his goblet, concealing a faint, meaningful smile. "Mr. Ron Weasley." The hall hushed. Ron's face went bright red. He displayed extraordinary tactical talent, commanding a wizard's chess duel that can be considered the most brilliant in Hogwarts history. Rubies poured into the Gryffindor hourglass. 50 points. Gryffindor erupted. Fred and George leapt atop the benches, hats flying. Percy tried to keep his prefect composure and failed. "Miss Hermione Granger," Dumbledore continued. Hermione's curls fell over her flushed cheeks as she bowed her head. She displayed remarkable wisdom and courage under the threat of fire and a troll. More rubies fell. Another 50 points. Padma Patil leaned to her sister and hissed, "I told you she should have come to our house." Slytherin's stares pierced the Gryffindors' backs like knives. "Mr. Harry Potter," Dumbledore's voice grew solemn. The hall fell nearly silent. He faced unimaginable challenges and displayed extraordinary courage and determination. Rubies cascaded down. 60 points. The enchanted ceiling might as well have lifted. The Gryffindor celebration was deafening. Lee Jordan danced on the table until McGonagall's glare sent him sliding back down. Finally, Dumbledore smiled a little. True courage lies not only in challenging enemies, but in standing by your principles in the face of your friends. He turned to Neville, who clutched his toad nervously. Mr. Neville Longbottom, for preventing his friends from breaking school rules and bravely facing the risk of ridicule and isolation. 10 points. There was a stunned pause, and then uproarious cheering. Neville sat frozen until Seamus shoved him awake. Gryffindor's hourglass now outshone Slytherin's. The red and gold glowed brighter. "I think," Dumbledore said cheerfully, "it's time for new decorations." He clapped. Slytherin banners shimmered and became crimson and gold lions. Thousands of golden-red balloons drifted down from the ceiling. The Fat Friar's ghost flitted among the tables, jubilant. McGonagall fixed her hat. Flitwick clapped. Professor Sprout smiled gently. Snape forced a strained, awkward smile. Sagres allowed a half-smile. Dumbledore's last-minute reversal had, in his view, made the cup mean even less. The professors held the power to give points. Snape's favoritism and McGonagall's strict impartiality were ultimately arguments about whose standard of excellence prevailed. Dumbledore's sudden addition of points to decide the cup felt like authority trampling rules. What worth did that symbolic trophy hold? Feeling flat rather than pleased, Sagres rose and left the hall. It was satisfying, in a petty way, to see Snape's face go green with anger, but the whole affair seemed childish and undignified. Professor Greengrass." The trio's calls came from behind him. Sagres paused and turned. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were running to catch up, breathless. "Can I help you three?" he asked lightly. Gryffindor's heroes should be enjoying the cheers. They exchanged awkward looks. The glow of victory had been tempered. "Professor, we didn't expect Dumbledore to give us those points," Harry began. "We know you gave us points already, but—" "Oh, come on," Ron blurted, hair like a small bonfire. "Snape gave Slytherin at least 200 inexplicable points. This is—" He stopped when Hermione shot him a look. "That's not the point," she said. "It's not. This is a bit out of order." She searched for a softer phrase and failed. Sagres found their discomfort, how they'd grown, almost amusing. They weren't intoxicated by victory. They'd sensed something troubling in the way it was won. He let the heavy curtains along the corridor part with a flick of his wand so the orange light of the setting sun spilled through the stained glass. "Relax," he said quietly. "The House Cup is a children's game. Its real purpose is to teach you to follow rules. It makes management easier." "Is that so?" Ron's confusion showed on his face. The simplicity of Sagres' remark punctured an illusion. Sagres pointed to the jeweled hourglasses embedded under the hall's dome. "The sparkle of those gems is only brief," he said. "True glory isn't in the hourglass, it's here." He tapped his wand against each of their chests. "The courage and wisdom in your hearts don't change when points are added or taken away. That is Dumbledore's purpose with this. He wants to honor your courage." He added, almost conversationally, that the headmaster had originally planned to give them special contribution medals, but had turned the idea into points instead. "So you can enjoy it with a clear conscience," Sagres said with a wry smile, "without worrying whether it was done by the book." "I don't quite understand," Ron muttered, running a hand through his hair. "You're speaking too profoundly, Professor," Ron complained weakly. "Simply put, follow your heart, even if the hourglass goes to 0. A raven glided out of the corridor and landed lightly on Sagres' outstretched arm, a letter clasped in its beak. "Now enjoy your feast and the holiday to come." He waved them back toward the great hall and turned toward the library, his robes tracing an elegant arc. As he walked, he thought, not unpleased, that his habit of reading success literature before he'd transmigrated had paid off, at least when it came to giving a comforting lecture to a few overexcited teens. 49. Bronze feather gathering night had fallen, and thick clouds hid the stars. In the dense forest, Sagres moved carefully through the thorny undergrowth, a black cloak pulled up to hide most of his face. Only a pair of cold, sharp eyes were visible beneath the hood. This was his first time here. The path was choked with vines and poisonous mushrooms. He even came across a few muggles who had mistakenly eaten hallucinogenic fungi and were chatting animatedly with tree stumps, campers by the look of them. He sighed inwardly, guided them out of the woods, and reached his destination almost exactly on time. An ancient manor stood alone deep in the trees, the air around it heavy with a nauseating stench. Sagres slipped through the fence and came to the manor's entrance, where two silent wax guards watched him with stiff attention. He tilted his chin to reveal a badge engraved with a raven. At the sight of it, the wax guards respectfully opened the large doors. Inside, candlelight flickered over a hall full of figures, most of them deliberately obscuring their faces. Some wore grotesque masks. Others, like Sagres, were wrapped in heavy cloaks. He seemed to be the last to arrive. "Look who's here," a cold, hoarse voice called from the room. A wicked dark wizard, wanted by the International Confederation of Wizards for 15 years and known within the Bronze Feather as Shrike, lounged on a floating Persian rug, idly tossing a gold coin in the air. "I hear you've become a professor at Hogwarts?" he added with a teasing drawl. Sagres gave him a cold glance and said nothing. He had no interest in wasting words. The Bronze Feather attracted all kinds of characters, and many of them were nothing but trouble. Around the hall, familiar faces glanced his way. Kestrel and Thunderbird wore masks, Nightingale was cloaked, Snowy Owl stood out in a white fur coat, openly showing her face, her argument being that a businesswoman couldn't hide if she wanted to do business. Sagres let his gaze sweep across the room, then gave a slight nod to announce his arrival. An old man with white hair clapped his hands and drew everyone's attention. "Now that everyone's here," he said, smiling, "we have a new member joining us." Everyone took their seats around a large oval table as the old man introduced an unfamiliar middle-aged woman. "This is our new member, codename Wren," he said. "Her sigil looks like a half-formed odd mark. She is extremely skilled with magical locks and breaking complicated sealing spells." The woman looked nervous. She had not adjusted her attire and stood awkwardly when urged to greet the group. Her words met only a few polite nods. The old man looked to Sagres. "Raven, since you were the last to arrive, why don't you introduce the new member?" Sagres did not stand. He leaned back in his chair, expressionless, and began to point at people around the table in a flat, deliberate voice. "Shrike," he said, indicating the man on the floating rug, "a wanted criminal, a dark wizard with a large bounty." He ignored the angry look Shrike shot him and continued. "Swift, a curse breaker, adept at finding magical ruins." The young man Sagres pointed to stood and gave a brief nod to Wren. "Wren," he said, a simple acknowledgement. "Kingfisher," Sagres went on, gesturing to a goblin with greedy eyes, a goblin craftsman skilled in certain forging techniques. The goblin hadn't bothered to disguise himself. What disguise could mask a goblin's height? "Snowy Owl," he said, "a black market merchant. She'll handle buying and selling fairly." Snowy Owl smiled. "Nightingale, a potion master. You can purchase any potion from her at a reasonable price." Nightingale's silver-gray cloak shifted as if she inclined her head under the hood. "Kestrel, a diviner, though she hasn't taken commissions in 2 years." The red-haired girl in a pretty mask immediately pouted at that. "Thunderbird, a wandmaker, skilled in a North American style." Thunderbird smiled and nodded politely to the newcomer. "Stork, an informant. Go to him to seek or spread information." He pointed to a man in a black robe whose gaunt frame showed through the cloth. "Bird of Paradise, an alchemist," Sagres continued. "He likes to experiment on squibs and is skilled at mechanical modifications." Wren swallowed hard at the description. Beneath the other's hood, she could just make out part of a mechanical face, gender indistinct. "Hummingbird, a healer, good at treating injuries caused by the dark arts." A young woman rose quickly and bowed to Wren. "Robin, a defense expert, constructs barriers and safe houses." A woman in a feathered mask pursed her lips and nodded firmly. "Falcon, a dark wizard, skilled at tracking and assassination." "Pelican, a dark wizard, skilled in poaching." "Lark, a dark wizard, skilled in theft." "Hoopoe, a dark wizard who transplants magical creature organs." And finally, Albatross. Sagres finished, pointing to the white-haired man who had spoken moments before. "A scholar. He recommended you, so I won't elaborate further." Albatross smiled weakly, a hint of embarrassment in it. "Didn't you already say it?" he murmured. "My codename is Raven." Sagres remained seated, unmoved. The few men he had bluntly labeled dark wizards scowled darkly. Their eyes flashed with anger, but no one rose to challenge him. Sagres didn't care. To him, these people were a motley collection, rotten fish and shrimp, the dregs of humanity, not worth much attention. Were it not for the Bronze Feather's strict rule against internal strife, he mused, they would long ago have been on their way to Azkaban. Only a handful of the assembled could be called benign, and Sagres dealt with them most often. The rest either knew nothing he didn't already know, or they simply weren't worth his time. The atmosphere was stiff. Eventually, Albatross stepped forward to smooth things over, seating the newcomers and steering everyone back toward the business at hand. The issue was straightforward. The Cursebreaker Swift had found a hidden magic ruin. After a cursory investigation, he believed it to be the tomb of an 11th century papal bishop, and the ancient texts suggested it contained numerous valuable magical artifacts. The ruin's layered, hypersensitive traps had driven Swift to seek help from his companions in Bronze Feather. Everyone listened with interest, everyone but Sagres. He had visited that ruin during his travels and found nothing worthwhile, but he didn't intend to tell them. The next few commissions were likewise about tracking down rare items and materials, the conversation rising and falling. Sagres sat beside Snowy Owl and leaned in to speak quietly. "It might buy you 5 more years, he said uncertainly. "I'm not sure. First use seems to be the most effective." He produced a small crystal vial and passed it to her. Snowy Owl turned the bottle over in her hand, a small, satisfied smile twitching at her lips. In return, she drew an exquisitely crafted hourglass from her handbag and offered it to him. "Just so we're clear," This can't be used as is, she reminded him. It's damaged. She had already mentioned that in her letter, but as a matter of professional ethics, she emphasized it again. Understood, Sagres said, slipping the hourglass into his cloak. He added a warning. You should take that thing somewhere safe soon, or it will bring trouble. If Lord Voldemort learned she had it, he would come by any means necessary to seize it, even if the little vial was trivial to him. Snowy Owl stared at the crystal bottle, nodding absently. Nearby, a goblin craftsman, who had been talking to someone else, suddenly went still. His eyes swelled with greed as he fixed on the vial in Snowy Owl's hand. He was an old, well-informed goblin. At the moment their small exchange completed, the windows on either side of the hall shattered, and glass rained inward like thrown daggers. The goblin's face shifted. He slammed the table over and spat an accusation. "Did you bring a tail, Professor?" Sagres glanced at him with a trace of disdain. "Do I need to team up with someone like you?" Before the words had even left his mouth, aurors from the ministry descended into the hall with a roar. Thunderbird shattered the chandelier with a single spell, plunging the chamber into darkness. A scattering of Lumos charms flared up, throwing pale light on shocked faces. In the chaos, the short goblin's greed finally overwhelmed him. He cast a slashing spell at Snowy Owl's back in a bid to grab the elixir. Sagres flicked his wand, and a thick barrier of magic sprang up, stopping the blow. At the same time, a sharp, lightning-fast fluctuation rolled outward, and the goblin's raised arm collapsed to the floor. "Save it, Glock." Sagres planted his boot on the goblin's severed wrist, and wand still in hand, silenced the creature's shrieks. The goblin's cries choked away. Sweat ran into his eyes. Then Sagres surveyed the pandemonium and snapped his fingers. Gravity in the hall reversed in an instant. Everyone was yanked toward the vaulted dome, helpless as if bound by invisible cords. The spell lights winked out, and darkness swallowed the room. Sagres flicked his wand again, and the 17 members of Bronze Feather were yanked through space as if reeled in by ropes, gathering about him. Whether they wanted to or not, they were carried away by the sudden spatial transfer. After a violent ripple of power, the Bronze Feather members vanished, and only a group of aurors tumbled down from the ceiling into the now empty hall. In a safe house in France, 18 figures materialized into a cramped room, filling it without warning. "We have a traitor among us," Sagres announced, flat and cold. The words froze the air. He cast an undetectable extension charm, and the safe house's interior expanded several times over, easing the crowding. Then, with another precise motion, he anchored the space. No one could apparat out. Silence. The 17 remaining members watched the goblin writhing on the floor, his arm gone and his mouth forced shut. Everyone present had seen his treachery in the hall. Sagres toyed with his wand, watching them with a half-smile. "Until the truth comes out, no one leaves," he said. This was far more interesting than an ordinary information exchange. "Why?" Shrike, a dark wizard, spoke up with a grim expression. "When did you get to be the one giving orders in Bronze Feather?" Falcon and Pelican shifted and nodded, drawn into Shrike's challenge as if by the dark reputation that clung to Sagres. But Sagres merely smiled, amused by the question. A flash of scarlet spell-light lanced from his wand. One moment Shrike stood there, the next he was a streak of blood and flesh spattered across the wall. A collective shiver ran through the room. Even Glock, still on the floor, stopped his muted screaming. Sweat and shock ran down his face. "Are you misunderstanding something?" Sagres said without expression. "I am not asking. I am informing you." A cruel smile played at his lips. This was his moment to purge Bronze Feather from within. He did not want protests. He wanted the truth revealed, and he would force it if he had to. But Sagres considered himself, above all, reasonable. They had worked together in a secret organization for years. If someone showed weakness and yielded, he couldn't simply slaughter them without cause. This wasn't a game where kills earned experience points. Snowy Owl drew her wand and pressed its tip against the goblin's throat. Sweat beaded on his brow, making him look even more terrified. "Why did you attack me?" Her voice was cold as frost. "And flipping that table so deliberately, what were you trying to hide?" "Gentlewoman, I was blinded by greed for a moment, and I've paid dearly for it." Glock trembled, holding up his stump where an arm had been severed. pleading in a low, humble voice. But I'm not an informant. What goblin would invite trouble by dealing with an auror? I'm telling the truth. Nightingale reached into her robe and produced a delicate black bottle. All eyes turned to her. Powerful veritaserum, she said, holding it up. 3 drops and the truth will spill. Glock went pale. Under the crowd's intense stares, he did not refuse. Why are his ears turning purple? Kestrel asked, wide-eyed, as he watched the goblin who had taken the potion. It's how veritaserum shows on people, Thunderbird explained. Human ears do the same. The color fading means the potion is wearing off. Nightingale nodded and began the questioning. Your true name. Glock lay on the floor, dazed. A web of tiny, shimmering runes traced across his skin as his eyes rolled to the ceiling. Mauritius Glock, he said blankly. Have you leaked secrets to the Ministry of Magic? No. Did you betray Bronzefeather's meeting information? No. He answered like an automaton. Faces in the room went grave. It looked like the leak might not be him after all. Sagres stepped closer and inspected the runes. Something wrong? Nightingale asked. He straightened, a smile of uncertain meaning on his lips. He's faking it. Has he had veritaserum before? Glock twitched only slightly. One of his big ears gave the barest movement. That hint and Sagres' confidence sent a ripple through the room. All eyes swung back to Nightingale, the one who had produced the potion. For a moment she looked accused, but Sagres cut the thought off. Not her, he said. He pointed at the motionless goblin. Those are anti-interrogation runes from Gringotts. The newcomer, Wren, understood at once. Goblin vault keepers at Gringotts who know passwords are branded with those runes to stop them from spilling secrets. Snowy Owl curled her lip. So you're a Gringotts goblin. At that, Falcon and the others visibly relaxed. They had feared Sagres might use this as an excuse to purge dissent. Now, with the goblin likely innocent, finding the real leaker seemed necessary. Albatross, white-haired and suddenly furious, stood. Then why did you tell the ministry where our Bronzefeather meeting would be? He demanded. Glock remained inert on the floor, but new outrage flared in the crowd. Wren, flushed with anger, snatched her wand and pointed it at the goblin's forehead. Glock stopped his pretense and scrambled to his feet, begging hysterically. Spare me. I wasn't lying. Really. Wren's wand light brightened. She looked ready to cast something ugly. Sagres narrowed his eyes. If no one intervened, the goblin might be killed on the spot. Everyone, Sagres said calmly, pointing at the terrified creature. If we're going to investigate, do it properly. I'll examine his memories. Without hesitation, he flicked his wand. Threads of memory reached from the goblin's temple into the air. Sagres used memory replay to play them back, one by one, for all to see. There was no betrayal recorded. The goblin had not leaked anything. When Sagres was done, he returned the threads to Glock, who might wake with gaps and confusion. After that ordeal, and given his age, senility was a real risk. But compared to almost being executed, it was a mercy. It seems the matter is not finished yet, Sagres said, scanning the crowd. We have more veritaserum. Finding the truth is only a matter of time. He pointed at Wren. You're next, Wren blinked. Me? Yes, you, Sagres said. Her aggression and newcomer status made her too conspicuous to ignore. She didn't get to refuse. Nightingale tapped the bottle 3 times. 3 metallic sheen drops fell precisely into Wren's opened mouth. The woman's pupils dilated, the color in her ears shifted, and silvery veins like filigree showed beneath her skin. Your true name. Eliza Ferguson, came the hollow reply, saliva at the corner of her mouth. Have you ever leaked secrets to the Ministry of Magic? Yes. Faces went stiff. Which organization do you belong to? Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Albatross's face crumpled. Do you have accomplices? No. What is your objective? To lie low, observe, assess, and find an opportunity to capture the wanted criminal, Shrike Kelfist. Yeah. The elder Albatross sagged as if his convictions had been cut from under him. A few soft jeers rippled through the crowd. Stork, the declared informant, couldn't hide his contempt. Old man, he said, voice oozing sarcasm, are you so far gone that you'd recommend someone from the ministry? Eliza stammered, trying to explain. This time, I was old and confused. I'll make amends. I'll compensate. Albatross sat back, utterly defeated, as if every hope had been drained from him. Chapter 52, The Real Betrayer. Heh, how interesting. Sagres shook his head, a playful smile tugging at his lips. Guess what I found? Every eye in the room swung to him. He extended his wand and drew out a shimmering thread of memory belonging to the newcomer, Ren. The images unfurled above them, and everyone watched as she met with an auror from the French Ministry of Magic and handed over information. What's wrong with this? Nightingale's voice was sharp. He could smell the falsehood in the air. Sagres would not make a baseless accusation. Clumsy and crude, Sagres said, zooming in on key frames and slowing the playback. This looks like the work of a beginner in memory weaving. Are you saying someone altered her memory? Nightingale asked. Sagres didn't answer directly. Bird of Paradise looked puzzled. What are you getting at? It means the memories we just watched were deliberately designed for us to see, Sagres said. Kestrel's voice dropped. So, Albatross, care to explain? Sagres cut in, fixing the old man with a look. All eyes shifted to Albatross. The old man's face had gone white, sweat beaded at his temples. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. You will soon. Sagres did not hesitate. He cast legilimency, and the room watched as his magic cut into the old man's mind like a blade. Albatross's occlumency was good, but not good enough. In moments, Sagres found the proof he was looking for. Your occlumency is decent, Sagres conceded, but you picked the wrong opponent. Albatross twitched and foamed at the mouth as Sagres dragged his memories into the open. In the unveiled images, Albatross stood beneath the dim lanterns of the leaky cauldron, pressing a small bronze feather emblem into a hidden spot on Ren's chest. Later, under cover of night in her lodgings, he ambushed her and used memory weaving to fabricate memories, planting false meetings and false loyalties, then quietly leaked the bronze feather's meeting place to an official at the French ministry, his eyes alight with triumph. His motive was ugly and simple. The bronze feather had long been leaderless, and as the oldest member, Albatross believed he should take command. To secure the position, he intended to eliminate anyone he judged unstable or disobedient, those he could not control. The aurors from the French ministry, however, had been clumsy. His setup should have led to their capture, but the operation went disastrously wrong. Still, he had a fallback, a scapegoat. Frame the newcomer, make the ministry think the bronze feather had a traitor, shift all blame, and perhaps even bolster his own standing by exposing the traitor. He prided himself on his skill with falsifying memory. He thought it foolproof. He had not expected to run into Sagres. Sagres stopped the memory playback. That's enough for now. He turned to the others, his voice steady and decisive. The new meeting is scheduled for 1 week from now at the safe house in Paris. There were nods all around, and one by one the room emptied in a shower of apparition. Everyone except 8 people who had received a nudge from Sagres and stayed. Nightingale, Potion Master, Snowy Owl, Merchant, Kestrel, Diviner, Thunderbird, Wandmaker, Hummingbird, Healer, Stork, Informant, Robin, Defense Expert, and Swift, Cursebreaker. The 3 others, Goblin, the newcomer Ren, and Albatross, were left lying on the floor in the corner, as Sagres had indicated. I know you all have questions, Sagres said once the others had gone, and I'll answer them, one by one. He waved his wand. The 3 on the floor were conjured nearer, and an oval table with 9 bronze chairs manifested in the center of the room. Sagres took a seat, and the rest followed suit. Everything I said earlier about that meeting is to be considered void, he began. The statement drew confused looks. You'll see why. He produced another slender thread of memory. As it bloomed into images, the room went quiet and faces tightened. This is the original memory of the newcomer Ren, Sagres said. Albatross would not have guessed that the scapegoat he chose so carefully was actually a real spy for the ministry. Kestrel blinked. So we misjudged him? Sagres' smile was gone. His expression was sharp and unyielding. No, we did not misjudge him. He committed the acts we saw, pinning the emblem, planting false memories, and leaking information. That is undeniable. But 2 things complicate it. The newcomer truly met with a ministry auror, and Albatross thought he was framing an innocent. He was instead framing a genuine traitor. He lifted his wand and drew a line through the air. The memories above them scattered like threads and then reassembled under his control. He demonstrated in detail what had happened, how Albatross had used memory weaving to craft a narrative that would point to Ren as a treacherous mole, the crucial frames intended to guarantee the ministry's wrath would fall upon the bronze feather. Everyone watched, and no one doubted the old man's guilt. But Sagres had not stopped at exposure. He explained what he had done next. "My father was a silencer," he said quietly, "and I learned certain things." Sagres described how, after seeing both the fabricated and the original memories, he carefully removed every thread of information about the 8 people present from Ren's mind. Then, deliberately, he rewrote her memory of the next meeting, setting the time and place for 1 week from now in a safe house in Paris, and gently planted that rewritten memory back into her head. "She will leak that meeting information to the French ministry and to the dark wizards," he said without remorse. "I did not act against them today, which I suppose was mercy." He fixed each person in turn with a grave, steady look. "The bronze feather will be purified. We will no longer tolerate those who act out of ambition or self-interest, those who endanger us and force us into hiding. You will not have to suffer their threats any longer." "We will restore the bronze feather's prestige," Sagres continued. "This organization was born centuries ago to combat dark forces, and we will rebuild it. Each of you will be able to recommend new members, but vetting will be exceptionally strict." He waved his wand, and all the bronze emblems on their chests detached and flew into his palm. A soft, clear light bloomed, and 8 new bronze emblems appeared, more splendid and intricate than the originals. "I have enchanted these emblems and made some modifications," Sagres said, holding one up for them to see. "They can now transmit short messages and become a port key. From now on, meeting locations and times will be set on a rotating basis by members. Whoever sets the meeting will set the port key's destination. In a crisis, the emblem will be your guardian. So long as the caster's magic is within limits I have set, all spatial anchoring spells will be nullified when you activate the emblem. It will instantly transport you from danger and alert other members to come to your aid. To ensure they are secure, I've linked each emblem to its bearer's bloodline magic. With a single drop of fresh blood, the emblem binds to you. No one else can claim it." He paused, then leaned back slightly. "Finally, next week, at the safe house in Paris, every bronze feather member that appears in Ren's memory will be captured. They will be killed during forced resistance. At that moment, the International Confederation of Wizards' global manhunt for the bronze feather will end, once and for all." The room was silent after that, the weight of his words settling like dust. Sagres' expression was cold, but resolute. There was no softness left for compromise. Chapter 53. A Time Turner, Piece of Cake. It was already the afternoon of the next day when Sagres returned to Hogwarts. The purpose of his trip had been perfectly achieved. He sat in his office chair, staring at the delicate hourglass in his hand with a satisfied smile. A time turner, the Ministry of Magic's top-secret device, issued only to approved users. Its function was singular and absolute: travel through time. He remembered, from his previous life, Stephen Hawking's chronology protection conjecture, that quantum effects would prevent macroscopic time travel and so avoid paradox. 20 years had left a faint imprint on his mind. Once he had believed in nothing but science. Since transmigrating, though, he had turned to magic. The urge to go back and fix things was universal, and he'd felt it too once, but not now. He wasn't tinkering with the time turner to atone. He was doing it because the magic itself fascinated him. Sagres frowned as he examined the hourglass. "Let me think." He fell into thought. There were 2 obvious dangers: the grandfather paradox and the butterfly effect. The first leads to logical contradictions and can collapse a timeline. The second can make the future utterly unrecognizable from trivial changes. Timeline collapse wasn't merely physical destruction. It was the loss of causal coherence, the negation of existence, causality, even free will. Trying to reason about time travel with his current knowledge was futile. If his future self interfered with the past, wouldn't that be putting the cart before the horse? An endless loop? No more thinking. He waved to shoo away the Raven Locatus and decided to fix the time turner himself and test it. That would let him learn the mechanics of temporal magic firsthand. The core of the time turner was woven from time dust and threads of destiny. Time dust corresponding to celestial motion, threads of destiny to the concretization of causality. The problem with his device lay in the time dust. Long use had consumed some of it, upsetting the balance between the two materials and damaging the hourglass. To repair it, he needed to restore the resonance between those forces. But he had no spare time dust. If he couldn't replenish the time dust, could he create a new balance? The idea struck him. Extract some threads of destiny to compensate. Ingenious, he thought. With this plan, the repairs went quickly. 3 days and nights of relentless work later, the time turner came back to life. Nothing to it. He examined the hourglass with barely contained excitement. 1 minute first. He set the dial in the corridor and flipped the hourglass. Instantly, his body seemed to freeze while his mind sharpened. He watched the world reverse. Birds outside the window flew backward. The sun crawled back up the sky. The raven Locetus reversed its flight. Distant leaves returned from yellow to green. Snowflakes rose from the ground into the air. Furniture reverted into other forms. Strangers left and then reappeared. Finally, walls and ceiling dissolved around him. When he regained control of his limbs, he was standing on a large rock in an empty wilderness. His breath caught. Where had the time turner taken him? Hogwarts was gone. The bewilderment shifted to horror. This place was ancient, at least 1,000 years in the past. He checked the hourglass again. The sand was still flowing against gravity from the bottom back to the top. Where had the device put him? Somehow the time turner had carried him into a timeline in which he had never existed. Time magic was too complex. He'd only just begun to understand it. Maybe, when the sand finished flowing back, he would return to his original timeline. That'll probably take a few days, he estimated by the speed of the sand. Thankfully, his wand and other belongings were intact. He even pulled out half a bottle of Felix Felicis from his pocket, purchased thanks to Vilas. Whether a time-traveling luck potion would work was unknown, but he took 3 drops anyway. At least 1,000 years. Hope it's still good. He laughed to himself, then corrected. Logically, it was brewed more than 1,000 years later, so it couldn't be expired. Optimism was the only sane stance in such a situation. Sagres scanned the landscape for any sign of familiar architecture, but time had reshaped the land beyond recognition. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have believed this desolation could be the original form of Hogwarts. "What are you looking for?" said a cold female voice right behind him. Sagres' body went rigid. The voice was so close it sounded like it whispered into his ear, and yet he had sensed no approach. "Shadowless Swift," the woman said. Sagres reacted instantly. He activated Apparition, 3 rapid spatial jumps that snapped through the air, leaving 3 afterimages, finally materializing on a huge rock 10 meters away. His wand was already raised. A crimson spell-light condensed at the tip, scorching the air into shimmering distortion. Now he could see her clearly, a tall woman in a silver-blue robe, composed and graceful, as if his pointed wand didn't bother her at all. "What did you just drink?" she asked, her tone flat and oddly detached. Sagres' face hardened. Even before she spoke again, he felt countless invisible threads of magic probing toward him like a spiderweb. The strands were fine as hair, but carried a terrifyingly invasive power, trying to pry open his occlumency defenses. In the span of a breath, she had launched more than a dozen subtle mental incursions. Had his occlumency been weaker, she would already have rifled through his mind. "Advanced legilimency," he said coldly. "If you don't want to become a corpse, stop trying to break my occlumency." Chapter 54. Trial. The woman's eyes finally flickered, and a faint, almost contemptuous smile curved her lips. She tilted her head. Pure white hair cascaded like a waterfall, catching the moonlight with a metallic sheen. Sagres smiled back, a predator's cruel grin. "It seems you need a lesson." Before he finished, he raised his wand. A heavy wave of magical force burst from him, and the air was filled with the crisp, shattering sounds of invisible threads snapping. The woman staggered. Her already pale face grew paler, her blue eyes taking on an eerie glow in the moonlight. Sagres gave her no time to recover. He traced a dazzling arc with his wand and pointed it at the sky. Thunderbolt! In an instant, a lightning bolt as thick as a bucket cleaved the night with a deafening roar. The white flash turned the forest into daylight for a heartbeat. The lightning struck, sending out a terrifying shockwave. Ancient trees were carbonized by the heat. A 3-meter-wide crater erupted, its bottom churning with crimson magma. Ozone and scorched earth stung the air. Sagres stood on a huge rock, his black robes whipping in the heat. His senses told him the woman was not dead. Her figure had vanished in the explosion, but his magic perception still located her presence, coiled and venomous like a snake ready to strike. From diagonally behind him, a red shaft of light lanced out with the force of a physical blow. Petrificus totalis. Sagres didn't turn. With his left hand, he drew a perfect arc, murmuring, Protego. A silver-blue shield snapped into place and absorbed the petrification. Ripples ran across its surface. He had already aimed his wand with his right hand at the origin of the attack. Chaotic explosion. Violent magical fluctuations detonated, shredding trees within 10 meters into splinters. Amid the flying wood chips, the woman apparated, escaping the blast. Sagres pressed his advantage. Crimson Rend. A mournful red shard of magic lunged for her throat. She threw up a translucent circular shield to block it, but as the red light struck the charm, the shield went through a ghastly metamorphosis. Blood-colored, spiderweb-like veins crawled across the transparent barrier, and in a blink it fragmented into countless sharp blood blades that turned inward. The blades shot back toward her. She had to apparat again, but as her form was coalescing, spatial anchor. Sagres thrust his wand. The space within 100 meters hardened as if forged from iron. Her apparition was violently interrupted. Desperately, she reversed her wand, launching impedimenta at herself. The gray spell struck her, and she was hurled backward like a broken kite, narrowly escaping being shredded by the blades. Only a corner of her silver-blue robe was torn away, leaving her slightly disheveled. She abandoned disdain at last and raked her wand through the air. Ashwinder Plague. Dense gray-green smoke unfurled, serpentine silhouettes twisting within it, each snake eyeing him with a ghostly green poisonous glow. Sagres tried to blast it apart with Hurricane's rampage, but the smoke coiled like a living thing and refused to disperse. Surprise flickered across his face. He tapped his wand lightly. Vanish. Silver light like moonbeams scattered. The plague smoke began to thin. Just as it was about to clear, Sagres felt a sharp bite. A translucent gray snake had wound around his left arm and sunk its fangs into his flesh. Interesting, he said, sneering. He pressed his wand to the wound. With a quick cutting incantation, the snake let out a shriek. The bitten piece of flesh fell free with the creature. The gray snake dissolved into a wisp of smoke. The wound's muscle was already blackening and rotting before his eyes. Sagres ran his wand over the injury. The pale light of Vulnera Senentor flowed, and new flesh pushed outward, while black smoke wreathed the wound. You're more troublesome than I expected, the woman's voice echoed from all around, as if many versions of her spoke at once. But the game has only begun. Sagres tightened his grip on his wand. A hard smile tugged at his lips. Just the way I like it. Rain of sorrow, she cried. Her wand arced and the sky darkened. Lead-gray clouds rolled in and heavy drops began to fall. This was no ordinary rain. Each drop carried the sting of despair, burning little black lesions on the skin and gnawing at a person's sanity. Sagres let the rain run down his face and felt negative memories press at his mind. Abuse, bullying, injustice, self-doubt. The spell was a terrifying blend of dementor-like despair and high-level weather magic. The corners of the woman's mouth lifted, but her smile froze as Sagres' voice cut through, cold and unnatural. Mechanical mind. He suppressed every emotional fluctuation, his inner life flattening to still water. Weather charm. Dispel. A dazzling black light shot into the clouds and condensed into the projection of a gargantuan raven's head in the sky. In an instant, the dark clouds split, the wind died, the rain stopped, and sunlight poured back across the battlefield. For the first time in the duel, the woman's face lost its smugness. Solemnity edged into her expression. Sagres' unease deepened. Her magic was profound, perhaps rivaling even Dumbledore's. Fiendfire of the underworld, she intoned. Hundreds of pale fiendfire crows burst forth, screaming as they formed a tightening ring. Their wings burned with a cold, soul-charred flame. Temperature plunged, frost patterned the ground. I advise you to give up resistance, Sagres said with terrible calm. Of course, you can also become ashes. The fiendfire crows tightened their encirclement. The air tasted like death. Sagres had been planning to question her. Why here? What was she doing? Even what time it was. When the woman looked at the crows, felt the lethal magic in them, and for the first time lowered her wand. I admit I underestimated you, but she slowly lowered her wand as if conceding. Then, just before the gesture finished, she looked up and cried, "Chains of fate!" From her chest shot a blue chain inscribed with ancient runes, moving faster than thought. Sagres reacted instinctively, throwing up a fire shield charm, and a blazing wall manifested between them. The runic chain ignored the fire entirely, passing through it and boring straight into his chest. "It's useless," the woman sang, voice oddly lyrical. "Our destinies are linked. Any harm you visit upon me will be reflected upon you." Her tone remained steady, but Sagres detected the tremor beneath, a weakness. She had clearly used a desperate trick. Otherwise, she would not have risked such an entanglement. Chapter 55, The Walking Catalog of Forbidden Techniques. "Indeed, I have no reason to act again." Sagres inclined his head slightly, his voice softened. The woman's shoulders loosened, then stiffened all at once. "But I never need a reason to do things." Sagres changed the subject, and a spiraling cone of silver-white light screamed through the air. Boom. The woman was blasted backward, spitting blood. Her wand flew from her hand. Sagres fared no better. Though he braced to defend, the damage arrived as if from nowhere, unavoidable. He tore his wizard's robe open and found a hideous wound across his chest. He gripped his wand until his knuckles went white. He forced himself to cast a quick heal, and when he looked up, the woman was visibly recovering too. The spell was troublesome, but the runic chains anchoring him had faded somewhat. Sagres made a quick decision. A ruthless glint lit his eyes. He pressed the wand against his chest with the back of his hand. Buzzing blast. The dazzling white light sank into him, and he trembled violently. The woman's recent wounds split open again. She emitted a shrill scream. He watched her sprawled on the ground and knew his deduction had been correct. With a cold sneer, he healed himself once more. Both of them recovered enough that the chains grew fainter still. "Almost forgot," he said, and then, merciless, "Crucio!" A streak of red struck the woman. She arched and began to convulse, a series of inhuman wails tearing from her throat. Her fingernails gouged the earth. Her knuckles twisted under the force of the torment. Nerves flamed, blood felt scalding, an agony not of ordinary pain but of tens of thousands of red-hot needles driven through every fiber. Invisible claws twisted her heart with each beat. Sagres watched, expressionless, while the woman crumbled under it. "It seems your tolerance for pain isn't as good as mine," he observed, then placed his wand on his chest again. Crucio. As her screams continued, the blue runic chains around them grew paler and then shattered. Threads of legitimacy flooded into the woman's mind, probing for secrets, but Sagres barely had time to begin his search. A lethal killing intent assaulted him from behind. Corrupting gaze! Sagres didn't even turn. The fire crow he had conjured flared up behind him in a defensive arc. The man's reaction was almost precognitive. Even the green flicker of a killing curse couldn't catch him. Still, the spell landed. Sagres felt a cold flash at his back. He shifted into a shadowy crow form and changed position. Only when he dropped from the sky did he see the newcomer. The man was impossibly handsome, cheekbones sharp, features carved with indifferent precision. His face betrayed nothing. Sagres took in his own ruined robes, ash where fabric had been, skin festering so visibly it seemed to burn, yet oddly, no pain, only cold numbness. "Poisonous devour and revert," he muttered. A deep purple light wrapped Sagres. The festering wounds flared with an eerie green. The forbidden art converted poison into healing energy, fighting toxin with toxin. He normally avoided it. If it failed, the backlash was worse than the original wound. Today it worked. He'd taken a few drops of Felix Felicis beforehand. The man frowned, a tiny motion, but enough. His lips twitched, and a hoarse, sibilant hiss left him. The whisper rolled across the field, making the ground tremble. Sagres' suspicions snapped into place. With a pale sweep of the man's arm, the earth erupted. Rotten hounds crawled up, their bones stark white. Shrouded humanoids clawed free, blue flames sputtering in hollow eye sockets. Giant skeletons rose, nests of venomous snakes coiled in their rib cages. "March of the Dead," the man intoned. His voice grated like a blade across stone. All the dead turned their heads as one, lifeless eyes locked on Sagres. The corpses at the front accelerated, and a thick black mist bled from their bodies, curling into a huge, tormented human face in the air. Sagres did not hesitate. He thrust his wand skyward and slashed it down. Meteor summon. A colossal meteor tore through the clouds, tail blazing. It struck with such speed the ground scorched black before impact. At the same instant, the handsome man thrust his wand toward the woman. Invisible force drew them together. The earth swelled, and a giant snake burst from the ground, swallowing them both before racing away from the meteor's blast zone. Trying to escape? Sagres' eyes cooled. He loosed a precise, brutal spell, Frenzied Explosion, which hit the snake mid-body and cleaved it in two. A crimson bolt followed and shredded the upper half into a rain of gore. In the blood mist, the man and woman emerged, disheveled. The man's lips moved, hissing like a reptile. From Sagres' feet, 3 venomous snakes shot up, eyes vertical and pupils rimmed with purple flame. Bone and flesh wither! Sagres flicked his wand. A gray-white sweep stripped the 3 snakes of flesh. White bones clattered to the earth. But more giant serpents responded from every direction, each thicker than a bucket. Sagres watched them, calm, and then spoke 4 words that bent the sky. Stars fall. The heavens darkened as hundreds of meteors ripped through the clouds, each a burning spear. The forbidden spell had once leveled the Goblin Fortress, Black Iron City in 1717, a combined ritual that historically required 7 wizards and the ruins of an ancient observatory. Now, Sagres unleashed it alone. Meteors pummeled everything into obliteration. As the bombardment bought him a heartbeat, Sagres waved his wand again. Actio! Corpses! All the blasted snake bodies and undead remnants flew toward him, their blood stringing into crimson threads that braided into runes in the air. Flesh and blood forging. Bones ground on bone, flesh writhed and merged. The infamous forbidden transfiguration, banned by the International Confederation of Wizards for the monstrous abominations it wrought, did its work. In seconds, an 80-foot behemoth rose. A giant's torso, dragon wings, octopus tentacles, a clutch of mismatched heads from many creatures. Each head howled, voices merging into a chorus of suffering. Sagres stood astride the creature's shoulder, black robes snapping in the heat of falling fire. He looked down at the 2 exhausted figures on the scorched ground below, and a cruel smile split his face. The battlefield was his catalog of forbidden techniques in motion, deadly, precise, and utterly without remorse. Chapter 56, Transaction. Wait, traveler. One of them lifted his head with effort, his voice raw. Begging for mercy? Sagres sneered, fingers idly spinning the wand he had taken. Don't you think it's a little late for that? With a sharp snap, he broke the other wand in 2. You forced my hand with those spells. He drew a long breath, a trace of feeling in his voice. I thought those curses would rot inside me forever. A blazing meteor struck the flesh and blood monster. The fiery stone sank into its massive form like a drop of water, and the creature's skin began to glow a sickly red, as if it had been fed with fresh power. Choose your death, Sagres said, voice unnervingly calm. Quick or slow. The monster bellowed and began to convulse. Kill us, and you'll be lost forever in the river of time, the woman suddenly shouted, her voice unexpectedly clear over the wind. Sagres' brows tightened. He lifted his left hand, and the tumbling meteors froze in midair. The flesh and blood monster stilled as well. He tapped his wand once, and the broken wand stitched itself whole again in a ribbon of blue light. Tell me, he said, his gaze hardening. Rowena Ravenclaw, what else do you know? The woman met his look without surprise, as if she had expected him to name her. You need my help, she said. Otherwise, when the hourglass of time runs out, you'll be trapped forever in the gap. Sagres narrowed his eyes. Go on. I followed the stars to show you the way back, Ravenclaw said, her eyes bright. In return, you must solve some troubles for us. Sagres' smile was cold. Let's change the terms. You help me solve my troubles, and in exchange, his gaze swept over them. I'll let you walk away alive. Deal. Her quick acceptance threw him off. He almost wondered whether they had been meant to surrender all along. How will you help me? He asked. First, give me the hourglass. He said nothing, but at last he produced the hourglass and, almost casually, tossed the repaired wand back to Ravenclaw. She examined the hourglass a moment before she spoke. You didn't get it yourself? Sagres shrugged. Is that a problem? The hourglass has been tampered with. He flinched inwardly. For a moment, he thought of the snowy owl, then reminded himself she had warned him. Ravenclaw's fingers brushed over the faint threads of gold that flickered within the glass. The other party's technique is precise, but crude, she said. This isn't an accident. Someone extracted a key node from the threads of fate and forced you to appear at the wrong moment. Sargeras's Adam's apple bobbed and his face darkened. Ravenclaw probably thought she had identified the saboteur. He, however, mentally slapped himself. Of course, he knew who had done it. He had been foolish and arrogant enough to meddle with his own thread. "How can it be fixed?" he asked, avoiding her gaze and seizing on a new subject. Ravenclaw sighed. Silver blue sparks ran down the tip of her wand. Once a strand of fate is broken, it's hard to restore. However, she withdrew a Ptolemaic planetary model the size of a pigeon egg from her cloak, another kind of time-turner, and handed it to him. "Use this to go back. I've already set the date." Sargeras caught the model, glanced at it, and slid it into his pocket. "And the trouble you want me to solve?" A smile ghosted over Ravenclaw's face and vanished. "The witch hunts are getting worse. More witches and wizards are being hunted, tried, executed. Church pyres, noble bounties, panic among muggles. People are being driven to desperation." Salazar Slytherin lifted a hand, and vivid illusions spilled from him. A young witch dragged onto a rack, the ruin of a failed cat's tail transformation visible under her torn skirt. A mob jeering, some striking her with sticks, others lifting her skirt with iron tongues. Children seized by frightened muggles after magic flares, helpless, hauled away for cruel interrogations and water tests, sink and drown, float and be branded a witch and executed. In a dark cell, an old man in chains had his fingernails torn out with tongues because a neighbor accused him of stopping a cow's milk with a look. Charred flesh blistered in flames, children gagged in waterlogged sacks, the screams of victims as their nails were pulled, scenes more barbaric than the histories Sargeras remembered. Most victims were muggles, but wizards were being hunted almost to extinction. Magic was still primitive. The master-apprentice model meant most wizards could not stand against the church's armies and noble knights. Sargeras was silent for a long moment. "What do you want me to do?" His voice was dry. "Start a war? Or, we need change," Ravenclaw said, steady and urgent. "We need to protect young wizards and preserve the knowledge of magic." "So you want to open a school?" Sargeras cut in. "A school? A place to train witches and wizards?" Ravenclaw raised an eyebrow. "Isn't that obvious?" Sargeras bristled and then softened. "No, well, yes, a school is a good idea," Ravenclaw considered. "But it's not that simple," Slytherin interjected. "Then what exactly do you want me to do?" "You know in your heart," Ravenclaw said, looking straight at him. "You know what must be done." It clicked for Sargeras. As a traveler of time, he already knew much of the future. They didn't need him to lay everything out. They needed him to point the path. "Build a school, then. Here." He made the flesh and blood monster stamp the ground. "Hogwarts. Take in every child who awakens to magic." "Hogwarts?" The two looked puzzled. "The school's name? Why Hogwarts? If you don't like it, Azkaban works too." "Let's stick with Hogwarts," Ravenclaw said, uneasy about the alternative. "But why? Hogwarts?" Slytherin asked, frowning. "Don't ask." Sargeras replied bluntly because he didn't have a better answer. It wasn't just about saving wizards. Many muggles falsely accused and hunted were innocent and had no one to help them. Sargeras, perhaps because he had once been a muggle, was willing to try. "This needs to wait until Godric and Helga return," Ravenclaw said at last. "They are our companions." Sargeras said nothing. He waved his hand, and the suspended meteors changed course as if obeying a thought, plummeting away into the distance. They struck a vast depression, and the heat fused the bedrock into black, glassy obsidian at the bottom of the crater. During the waiting days, Sagres spent most of his time studying time magic with Ravenclaw. It was profound and perilous, a discipline nothing like the destructive spells he had been developing before. Meanwhile, not far away in the wilds, Salazar Slytherin was dissecting one of the flesh-forged creatures Sagres had made. His crude laboratory glowed a sickly dark green. Snake-shaped candelabras set into the stone walls breathed cold blue flames that warped his shadow into something grotesque. On the simple workbench, a row of silver scalpels flashed. The hilts were inlaid with organs taken from different beasts, the vertical pupil of a harpy, the amber iris of a centaur, the tear gland crystals of a unicorn, still fresh and slick as if just removed. Sample 7. Begin recording, Slytherin intoned, his voice low, cold, and without effect. A hovering quill scratched an ink mark across parchment. The silver blade opened the creature's chest with surgical precision. A cluster of eyeballs inside contracted violently, and Slytherin did not so much as blink. The parchment wrote itself. There is a magical circuit at the junction of the wing bone and the pectoral muscle, shaped like a biological eye, presumed to be a bioconductor of flight magic. Sagres learned with startling speed. By the time Godric and Helga returned, he had mastered the basic principles of time magic. Whether Ravenclaw had withheld any crucial spells he could not tell. She was far too clever, a longtime student of time, fate, and memory. In his spare hours, he watched Slytherin's experiments as well. The future founder's methods were unexpectedly rigorous. Every step recorded, every conclusion repeatedly verified. Even compared to 20th century witches and wizards, few could match him. Though Sagres had beaten them that day in a duel, he harbored no doubt the four founders would achieve great things. The scrutiny was mutual. While Sagres observed the founders, they examined him in turn. His unconventional casting and the logic he brought from the modern world seeped into their thinking. It saddened him, quietly, how slowly magic had advanced in the centuries since, how the wizarding world seemed to stand still beside the march of Muggle technology. But he kept his thoughts to himself. Each era had its role. The founder's task was to build Hogwarts, not to spark a 1,000-year revolution. That, he believed, belonged to his own time. As dusk fell, a small black speck appeared in the sky. Sagres barely noticed until the shadow swelled, tearing through the clouds to reveal itself. A Ukrainian ironbelly, at least 65 feet from snout to tail, diving straight toward them. Once almost extinct by the 20th century, the beast glittered with silver-gray metallic scales that threw back the dying light. Each beat of its wings churned the air into a hurricane. Sagres' pupils narrowed. He drew a crimson arc through the air with his wand. The ground shuddered as the flesh-forged monster Sagres had created rose with a roar. Dozens of tentacles, like living pythons, lashed out and coiled around the dragon's scaled neck. The dragon bellowed in fury. A flash of silver light severed several thick tentacles. The unbalanced dragon pitched wildly. The 7 or 8 riders on its back were flung into the air, only to be saved by a scattering of levitation charms. A cold smile touched Sagres' lips. The creature's fractured back tore open, and a pair of enormous wings, stitched from broken bone and fascia, unfolded with terrifying speed, closing the distance to the falling dragon. Massive suction-cupped claws clamped down on the dragon's throat. Where scale met flesh, a grinding, corrosive sound rang out. "Stop!" Ravenclaw shouted at the same moment. The dragon sent out a gout of white-hot flame. The torrent should have incinerated the creature, but the monster drank the fire like a sponge. Its muscles swelled and trembled as raw energy poured into it. Sagres raised his left hand at once. On the brink of devouring the dragon, the flesh-forged beast froze as if cast in bloody marble. The dragon's agonized roar rattled loose stones. Its head, trapped in the monster's grip, began to fuse with the writhing flesh, scales sodden and sliding into dark red tissue. Sagres snapped his fingers. The construct let go. The Ukrainian ironbelly shrieked, staggered free, flapped furiously, and clawed its way back into the sky. "What on earth?" A booming voice broke through the clearing. A burly man with a beard and a pointed wizard's hat pushed through the spectators. Reddish-brown curls jutted stubbornly from under the brim. A jewel-encrusted longsword in his hand still dripped blood. "I finally caught that thing. I only rode it once," he bellowed. "Calm down, Godric." Slytherin stepped forward, pressing a pale hand reassuringly to the man's shoulder and murmuring something. Anger on the man's face folded into surprise. "It's him?" Godric said, more to himself than anyone else. Ravenclaw moved up and introduced Sagres. "This is Sagres, a traveler," she offered haltingly. She then turned to Sagres. "This is Godric Gryffindor." She pointed to a warm-faced woman at her side. "And this is Helga Hufflepuff." Helga was round and generous, her long pale gold hair threaded with purple wildflowers, a springtime smile softening her features. The hem of her linen dress was stained with fresh herb juice. "These are children rescued from the church," Ravenclaw added. Sagres' gaze flicked past them to the huddled youngsters behind the founders. Ragged, ankles black with bruises. They looked like trapped animals, eyes wide with terror. He wondered why Godric and the others had not changed them into better clothes sooner, but before he could dwell on it, "Rejoice," Sagres said softly. He lifted his wand a fraction. Golden motes of light drifted down and settled over the children's heads. With a few swift transfiguration spells, the rags became neat black robes. The smallest girl touched the fabric shyly, then broke into a tentative, surprised smile, the first he had seen from her that day. Godric folded his arms and looked Sagres up and down, curiosity and amusement dancing in his eyes. "Looks like we have a lot to talk about," he said, casting a meaningful glance at the bloodied, now still flesh construct. Then his face brightened. "But first," he grinned, suddenly boyish, "we need a good meal and then a few drinks." Chapter 11, The Beginning of Everything. "What did you say? Build a school?" Godric Gryffindor's thick brows shot up. His beard bristled like steel needles as his face went theatrically incredulous. "Where would it even be built?" Rowena Ravenclaw pointed her wand at the ground. "Here, in this god-forsaken wilderness." She didn't need to say more. Gryffindor pressed on. "Who will be the teachers? Who will the students be?" Ravenclaw's silver-blue eyes glittered in the moonlight. "The four of us will be the core teachers, and we can recruit more. As for the students," her gaze swept over the children wrapped in new robes. "Every young wizard who awakens must get a proper education. They shouldn't be left to die in witch hunts." "But some children already have teachers," Gryffindor protested, brandishing his jewel-encrusted longsword in a bright arc. Salazar Slytherin sneered, his pale eyes cold. "What use are those so-called teachers? 9 out of 10 can't even manage a decent lumos. Their skills are uneven, and most will never escape the church's pursuit." "So we're gonna poach them," Gryffindor said, rubbing his tangled hair, then suddenly grinned. "Rowena, you certainly know how to stir me up." He patted his chest. "Leave the publicity to me. I'll make sure every wizard in Britain knows about the prestige of Gryffindor." "Wait," Ravenclaw interrupted. "The school will be called Hogwarts." "What? Not Gryffindor School of Magic?" Gryffindor gaped. "Magnificent name. It will be called Hogwarts?" Ravenclaw's tone was firm. A blue light flickered at the tip of her wand. "But there will be 4 houses, one named for each of us." Gryffindor deflated like a punctured ball. All right, fine. Each of us gets a house. Mine will be Gryffindor House." He straightened and stroked his sword hilt with visible pride. "My common room will be up a high tower, draped in the reddest velvet." Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff exchanged a helpless look. Gryffindor suddenly clapped his forehead and flattened his hat. "Wait, why must it be 4 houses?" He wrapped a broad arm around Sagres' shoulder. The iron buckle of his bracer bit into the other man's skin. "This friend helped us a great deal. He deserves a house, too." Rowena's eyes flickered. She turned to Sagres. "What if we added one more? Azkaban, as you mentioned?" Sagres waved his hands in refusal. At that moment, the small Ptolemaic armillary in his pocket flared with dazzling blue light. The click of gears echoed, and Sagres' figure began to fade, like ink washed off paper. He tried to speak, but his form grew thinner and then vanished entirely within seconds. "Wait!" Gryffindor reached and grasped at nothing but a wisp of scattered starlight. "Merlin's beard!" He kicked a stone in annoyance. I still had so many questions for him. Ravenclaw spoke calmly, though there was a thin thread of wistfulness in her voice. "The law of time is calling him back. We cannot keep him." Only the silent, towering flesh giant at the edge of the clearing remained as proof that Sagres had been there. Everyone looked at the creature, then at each other. "What do we do with that thing?" Gryffindor asked, pointing. "Leave it to me," Slytherin said coolly. A tempting aroma broke the sudden heaviness. Hufflepuff lifted the lid from a copper pot. A golden, thick soup bubbled inside, while skewers of meat sizzled and slowly turned on the pot's rim. "Let's eat first," she said in her gentle voice and flicked her wand. Wild grass rose up and wove itself into a table. "Whether we're building a school or dissecting a monster," she said, throwing a pointed look at Slytherin, "we'll need strength." They ate until they were full and contented. Gryffindor wiped wine foam from his beard and then hesitated. "So, what should the castle look like?" Ravenclaw raised her wand and conjured a rotating miniature of Hogwarts made from earth and light. Bricks and stones glowed with enchantment. Tower spires cast long, slanting shadows beneath the moon. Gryffindor's eyes lit up. He jabbed his sword at a tall tower. There! Perfect for Gryffindor's tower. I'll take charge of the castle's defenses. I have ideas, moving staircases, animated armors, enchanted statues to patrol and protect the school. He went on excitedly, gesturing, then clapped Slytherin on the shoulder. Salazar, what about you? Slytherin was silent for a long moment. At last his pale finger rested on the crater at the edge of the model, the hole made by Sagres' meteorite. There. His voice was low. My house will be built beneath that. You mean you're going to live underground? Gryffindor said, clutching his shoulder in mock scandal. Don't be lazy. You have to help build the castle, too. Slytherin shrugged him off. I will be responsible for the castle's entire underground systems. He indicated the charred pit. And I intend to fill this with water for experimental subjects. Helga, where will you put yours? Gryffindor asked. Hufflepuff handed drinks to the younger wizards by the fire before smiling and pointing. Right here, she said, close to the kitchens. I'll be in charge of meals for students and teachers. You won't manage that alone. You must teach, too. Gryffindor crossed his arms. I'll recruit help. I already have some ideas. Hufflepuff winked. I'll also need greenhouses. Some rare medicinal herbs require special climates. Put it all here, Gryffindor said decisively, pointing. Hufflepuff nodded, then turned to Ravenclaw. Rowena, I want an observatory to study the stars, Ravenclaw said quietly, pointing to the highest point of the castle. Her wand threw a beam of light that projected a phantom of the Hogwarts library onto the model. I will take care of the library as well. Knowledge must be protected. I'll bring you books, Gryffindor announced eagerly. People will be glad to entrust their tomes to me. My Gryffindor senses a library that reflects our greatness. Slytherin rolled his eyes. Hufflepuff covered her mouth to suppress a chuckle. So, what courses? Gryffindor asked. I'll run dueling, Gryffindor said, drawing his treasured sword. Moonlight flashed along the blade. I'll teach fighting with both wand and sword. Charms will be my department, Ravenclaw said. Defense against the dark arts, Slytherin answered with a hint of cold steel. To resist darkness, one must first understand it. I'll teach herbology, Hufflepuff added, slipping the last piece of roast to a young wizard without looking up. A wizard must know the bounty of the earth. We'll need more teachers for other subjects, or we'll burn out, Ravenclaw remarked. When they debated admissions, Slytherin tapped his wand on the ground with a crisp sound. Not every child who can wave a wand deserves training, he said flatly. His cold gaze swept the circle. How many of those Muggle-borns will end up as the church's witch hunters? Salazar, Gryffindor barked. They had no choice. Give them a home, and they will defend Hogwarts with their lives. A beautiful fantasy, Slytherin scoffed. Each decides for themselves. My house will admit only those from wizarding families. Family ties bind loyalty. They won't raise wands against their own. Then I want the bravest, Gryffindor said, thumping his chest. Those who would face a dragon, true Gryffindors. Rowena considered and then spoke slowly. I will take those with sharp minds. I want to teach deep, profound magic. All eyes turned to Madame Hufflepuff. Her voice was usually gentle, but now it held an uncommon firmness. I value loyalty and fairness, she said, and any child who has nowhere else to go can come to my house. She looked at the others, then at the children with their uncertain, flickering eyes. Every child who comes here should find a home. Hogwarts must be a refuge, not another insurmountable wall. Chapter 59, The Reunion of Two Geniuses. The moment the time turner restarted, Sagres felt a disorienting lurch. His thoughts were like something trying to push through thick, sticky honey, while his body felt impossibly light, each movement sped up as if by some hastening spell. The world before him began to blur and fast forward. The four founders' wands braided together into a brilliant flowing lattice. Foundation stones burst from the earth like bamboo shoots driven by magic. The crater filled instantly with a lake of blue water that mirrored the tower's shadow. Figures flashed by like images on a rotating lantern. Young wizards lugging heavy tomes down corridors, newly hired professors in billowing robes crossing the courtyard. Some glanced in Sagres' direction, as if peering through frosted glass. When the tide of time finally ebbed, Sagres staggered and collapsed into the armchair in his office. He rubbed his temples until his thoughts and body came back into sync. He unbuttoned his collar with trembling fingers and checked his chest. No scars, no curse marks. Even the silver thread embroidery on his cuffs was intact. The Ptolemaic armillary sphere lay warm and still in his palm, its bronze surface bearing a temperature that did not belong to this era, a small proof that he had not simply dreamed it. "Wait," he muttered, frowning. "How am I in the office?" He spun around, wand snapping out. The oak door flew open with a crack. In the corridor, another version of himself was gradually paling, becoming as transparent as a faded oil painting. "Tsk, 1 minute then," he said to himself. He closed the door, tucked the time turner away with care, and against his usual energetic habits drew the curtains. He fell onto the bed and slept like a stone. Time flew. The new school year arrived. During the summer, Sagres had not neglected the problem of the bronze feather. He continued his quiet work to excise its malignancy. He had also received a letter from Nightingale informing him she had officially taken up the potions chair at Beauxbatons. Enclosed was a newspaper. The front page of the Pathfinder Daily showed French aurors proudly displaying confiscated bronze badges. "A 3-year pursuit finally concludes," the gilded headline crowed. "The notorious Bronze Feather organization has been completely wiped out." In the corner of the photograph, a mask riddled with a spell lay in a pool of blood. The article detailed the thrilling encirclement. Reliable intelligence had located the stronghold, and deadly spells had been unavoidably employed. It was pointed out that all the dead matched records in the International Confederation of Wizards' wanted archives. With that, the affair was neatly closed. Sagres had almost crossed the continent that summer, searching for clues about the sands of time, from the dragon blood black markets of Bulgaria to the Ancient Runes Research Institute in Norway. He had found nothing. If it came to it, he could always slip into the Department of Mysteries and borrow what he needed, but his research did not press for completion. He had time. In the last week before term, clinging to a final sliver of hope, he went to Diagon Alley and wandered into Flourish and Blot's rare books section. There, adjusting golden curls in front of a gilt mirror, was a familiar figure, Gilderoy Lockhart. In Sagres' memory, Lockhart had always been more skilled at self-promotion than at scholarship, the sort of man who puffed himself up in the common room and left a sentence in magic ink on the Ravenclaw notice board. "When you see my name in the paper one day, don't be surprised. That's only the beginning of my brilliant life." Most of their classmates had called him a joke who should be committed to St. Mungo's. Then, to everyone's surprise, Lockhart had become famous after graduation. Voyages with vampires, Break with a Banshee, Gadding with Ghouls, Travels with Trolls, Year with a Yeti, and an autobiography, Magical Me. Sagres had read a few of them. Except for the autobiography, the books contained at least some genuine material. But now Lockhart seemed even more ostentatious than before. He wore violet robes stitched with at least a dozen glimmering medals. Gold dust trailed behind his footsteps. Sagres wanted to steer clear, but Lockhart spotted him and glided over like a bee to honey. "Merlin, if it isn't our genius junior." Lockhart's voice was syrupy, thick with self-regard. Remort. A brand new hardcover of Magical Me on his chest flipped its own pages, each illustration more exaggerated than the last. Sagres remembered how, in his 6th year, Lockhart had almost been expelled for attempting a memory charm on his roommate to cover up cheating, pleading to the professors in that same cloying voice when caught. Sagres let out the faintest sigh. "It's you," he said, "about the Romanian demon hunter in Year with a Yeti." Lockhart's smile trembled into something that could have been genuine. "Oh, my dear junior actually read it." He clapped Sagres on the shoulder so hard an honorary member of the Anti-Dark Magic League badge dug into Sagres' arm. "Speaking of which, I'm preparing a new book." He glanced around as if making sure they were unobserved, then leaned in conspiratorially. "Have you seen the paper? Not the Daily Prophet, but France's The Pathfinder Daily, about the Bronze Feather." Sagres raised an eyebrow and waited. Lockhart preened. "Those inept aurors in France only cracked the case because of my behind-the-scenes maneuvering, although," he shrugged in mock regret, "I was a touch heavy-handed, but when you're up against such vicious dark wizards who can promise perfection—" Sagres pushed away the man's hand and smiled thinly. Is that so? Are you certain every member of the Bronze Feather was captured? Lockhart's smile faltered. Sagres went on, low and even. They were dangerous wizards. What if someone slipped through? Wouldn't you be worried about retaliation? Ah, Lockhart gave an uneasy laugh before smoothing his expression back into oily confidence. Don't you worry, Sagres. After all, I didn't charm away the Banshee of Bandon with mere good looks. You know, despite having won Wizarding Weekly's Most Charming Smile award 5 years running, I'm not one to boast. Lockhart's eagerness was a sickly mirror of the man Sagres remembered. The author clasped at his sleeve. Oh, my book signing is about to start. Come along. Really, you should be there. Even if the Daily Prophet never reports anything nice about you, I'm an expert at handling those tiresome reporters. I can teach you a few tricks. After all, geniuses ought to help one another, right? Sagres's patience thinned. He pulled his sleeve back. With a slight gesture, fingers barely brushing air, he sent a silent, confundus charm. An invisible haze curled around the chattering author. Sagres's voice was cool, flat as polished iron. You've mistaken me for someone else. He turned and walked away. Lockhart blinked, baffled. His expression emptied as the spell loosened his thoughts. By the time he recovered and looked around, the black-robed wizard he had been addressing had already melted into the crowd. The whistle of the Hogwarts Express split the September air, and the ancient castle thrummed again with the laughter of young witches and wizards. Sagres stood beneath the enchanted ceiling of the great hall, watching his elaborate Halloween decorations. Strings of lights shaped like intestines, floating brains and eyeballs that changed color with the music, being taken down piece by piece by house elves under Professor Flitwick's direction. My dear, these colors and combinations are simply too avant-garde, Flitwick remarked tactfully from the staff table. Sagres raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He flicked a stack of design blueprints into the fireplace and watched them curl to ash. It didn't matter. He was only killing time. On a long bench at the side of the hall, a copy of the Daily Prophet from a few days earlier caught his eye. He snapped a finger, and the paper floated into his hand. He skimmed it absent-mindedly and almost tossed it away until a headline stopped him. Shocking. 2 pureblood family heads brawl in the street. The photograph showed Lucius Malfoy's platinum hair being grabbed by Arthur Weasley, whose shirt had 3 buttons torn off. Sagres couldn't remember the last time he'd seen purebloods behaving like that, hair-pulling, slapping, even throwing punches, and a smile tugged at his mouth. As evening settled, the hall filled with students. Sagres sat at the staff table, idly rolling a silver goblet between his fingers before shrinking it into a single mithril particle and slipping it into his pocket. To his left was the seat of the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. At that moment, the owner of that seat arrived in the only way he knew how. Gilderoy Lockhart swept into the hall like a peacock, pale gold hair shimmering in candlelight, sky blue robes pinned with an alarming number of medals. Sagres noticed there were certainly more than there had been a few days before. Lockhart spent his entrance blowing kisses, posing for students, and allowing others to take photographs until Professor McGonagall finally nudged him into his chair. Ah, Sagres! Lockhart turned with his trademark dazzling grin. I was just about to. Sagres gave himself a silencing charm. The world narrowed to a quiet, and he stared up at the painted stars on the ceiling, debating whether to make an early departure. The sorting ceremony began. His eyes roved over the first years until they landed on a slender figure at the end of the line, Azkaban Greengrass, his nominal cousin. Oversized robes swallowed her frame and made her look smaller. Her skin was almost translucent in the candlelight, her gray-blue eyes bright with nervous excitement. Azkaban Greengrass, Professor McGonagall called, and the girl flinched, clutching the hem of her robe as she stepped toward the stool. The sorting hat settled on her light golden hair, and she worried the edge of her robe with trembling fingers. Time lengthened. The hat hesitated. Whispers rippled around the hall, quite unusual for a Greengrass. Sagres leaned forward, wand idle between his fingers. He was curious what the sorting hat was seeing. Ravenclaw, the hat finally declared. The Ravenclaw table exploded into cheers. The Slytherin side erupted into outrage. Traitor! Daphne Greengrass snapped, leaping to her feet and pointing at her sister. You've disgraced the family. What did father tell you before you came?" Astoria's shoulders stiffened for a heartbeat. Then she straightened and walked steadily to Ravenclaw amid the Slytherin cries. Her fingers were hidden in her sleeves and trembled wildly. The scene echoed one Sagres had seen before. Dumbledore made no move to intervene. Sagres rose and raised his wand. Silence. The hall fell as if someone had flipped a switch. Daphne's mouth hung open, but no sound came out. "Disrupting the order, 20 points from Slytherin," Sagres said, his voice low but carrying to every corner. Severus Snape sprang up like a drawn bat. "Sagres, this is the sorting ceremony." He glared at McGonagall and Dumbledore in turn. "It is not your place to give orders here." Sagres regarded him coldly, then his gaze swept over Dumbledore, McGonagall, and the students. 50 points from Slytherin. He tapped his wand. A beam of light struck the house point's hourglass, and the sand shifted. "Any more questions?" he asked without expression. Snape ground his teeth and sat down in a fury, breathing hard. Dumbledore cleared his throat. "Severus, sit down. Slytherin did disrupt the order." Snape shot the headmaster a look and subsided. Sagres inclined his head to McGonagall, then took his seat again, as if nothing exceptional had happened. The first years were hushed. The Slytherins had already lost 50 points on the very first night, before they'd earned a single one. Outside the hall, Harry and Ron, who had not taken the express and had driven themselves in a magical car, had just arrived. Ron set his trunk at the base of the steps and crept to a window. "Hey, Harry, look, they're doing the sorting," he whispered. Harry peered in. "Strange, where's Snape?" he said. "His seat's empty." "Who cares about that old bat?" Ron muttered, eyes scanning the line of first years. "Hope I didn't miss Ginny's sorting." "Maybe he's sick," Harry suggested. "Maybe he died of anger." Ron grinned. "He wanted the Defense Against the Dark Arts job again, has for years." "Maybe they fired him," Harry added. A cold, hollow voice cut in behind them. "Perhaps he's outside the Great Hall right now, listening to two idiots badmouth him." Harry and Ron froze. Blood drained from Ron's face, and Harry felt his stomach drop. "Perhaps your potions professor is still considering how many points to take from Gryffindor," the voice went on. "Turn around," Snape snapped. They obeyed, slowly, to find the tall, sallow professor standing in their path, his black robes a dark shadow. He looked them over with a thin, unpleasant smile. "And perhaps you will need to explain your spectacular flying car journey," he said. Harry and Ron opened their mouths and closed them again, the entire night suddenly much colder.